Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today, Jack is joining me for the Sun and Moon Ultra Prism set review. It is right around the corner. Myself and Jack and a few other friends have started to test these new archetypes, and it looks like there is a lot of exciting stuff in this set. So let's get straight on into it. First of all, a quick adjustment to the ratings that we've been doing, and then we'll get into all of these new cards.
So yeah, we've got our rating system. We're doing it again. We've had a slight. It's only a slight change. We're now basing it on the current standard format. There is some consideration into expanded, but we're primarily looking at standard. You can pause here to see exactly what each star represents. There's nothing too different, but yeah, we just wanted to have a bit of an overhaul just to make sure we were still rating these cards relatively fairly. Something we're doing a bit differently this time is we're going to start with the trainers because they're often some of the most impactful cards in the set. So kicking us off, we do indeed have Order Pad. Order Pad says, flip a coin. If heads, search your deck for an item card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Obviously, searching your deck for an item card can be a pretty strong effect. There's a lot of good item cards that you want to have access to, and just searching your deck for them is going to be great. We've had things like Trainer's Mail and Reserve Ticket that have done something similar in the past. Trainer's Mail, of course, in looking at the top four and getting any trainer. Reserve Ticket, flipping a coin to search your deck for a card and putting it on top of it. So these are all kind of similar style of effects. However, we've only rated it as a 2-star because in general, it's a flip a coin effect, meaning that 50% of the time, this is just going to be a dead card. You're not going to get any use out of it. There's benefits to having cards that don't do particularly too much in your deck, but in general, you don't want to be playing these kinds of cards. You want to have guaranteed effects on the cards that you're playing. Sure, if you flip heads, it can be game-winning, but also flipping tails can just leave you with sort of nothing in your hands. So yeah, we've only rated it as a 2-star because the coin flip effect, whilst strong, is still based on a flip.
Yeah, it's one of those things where at the moment in the format, we actually have like no item like power draw. Like we've been spoilt with things like Trainer's Mail and Acrobike. So when you see this, you just compare it to those cards and think, wow, this is like way, way worse. But the fact is, this is like the only option that we have really at the moment. So if ever we go back into the direction of having lots of like item draw and Pokemon draw, we could maybe start seeing it sneak into like combo lists. But there simply aren't any like turn one wombo combos out there because we don't have enough viable draw. So keep an eye on Order Pad. If we do start getting like a big overhaul of different draw type cards, it could be good. But its inherent effect isn't very strong right now. Next up, we have Palpad. This is obviously a card you should be fairly familiar with if you've been playing back from the Flashfire era. It says, shuffle 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your deck. And back in the days of the old Palpad, we had Versus Seeker, so Palpad never really saw play ever. It was just too slow and never really gave you much outside of like some stall decks kind of played it here and there to give you more fuel. But the future is a little more bright for Palpad, I think. We have Zoroark GX for trading, and we've seen that combined with puzzles because it's just so good to have a 5th or 6th Acerola or Guzma or whatever. And in a similar position, Zoroark decks can almost like to beat the mirror, start putting in Palpad so that they can have extra Guzmas and Acerolas. So it feels like a natural fit in Zoroark decks as like a single copy. Maybe you can even cut puzzles for different spaces if you start adding in Palpads. Although puzzle is still like obviously amazing. But it seems like an extra addition into exactly Zoroark decks. And then there's this whole thing that I've put in the bottom right corner about does replacing one Guzma for Palpad just make sense in the format so that you can gain maybe 2 Guzmas back or in the late game, or maybe like 2 draw supporters back if you're trying to end-proof yourself. Palpad seems to be potentially a natural inclusion over something like a 4th copy of Guzma in the majority of decks. So it could start seeing play here and there, where it never really saw previously because it was kind of too slow. It feels much more reasonable now. We've only rated it a 3 out of 5-star card because we're not certain whether or not it will be the case. Palpad is, at the end of the day, quite slow. And when you get into 2 cards, you see a Palpad instead of that 4th Guzma, you don't win the game. So at the moment, we're sort of on the fence with the 3th star. It feels like a natural fit into Zoroark, but we'll definitely see experimentation in more than just Zoro decks.
Yeah, for sure. We've started taking out sort of fourth N, fourth Guzma style cards to throw in a Power Pad. So that's, I think, the direction that Power Pad's going to go. But for now, we're happy where it is. Next up, we have Mysterious Fossil returning. This is an overhaul to Fossil mechanic that we've had for the past couple of years. The old Fossil mechanic was really, really bad, I think. This gives it a little... This is a little bit stronger. I still don't feel it's good enough, simply because the fossils we're getting aren't great as well. But that being said, you now play this card as a 60 HP basic, colorless basic Pokemon. Anytime during your turn, you may discard this card from play. This card can't retreat, and your opponent can take a prize on it. So it's slightly different to Robosub. But essentially, all of your fossils will evolve from one starting Pokemon now. That's essentially the new mechanic. I think it's much better than the old mechanic, but that being said, it's still only a 1-star card. 60 HP basics that do nothing aren't going to be great unless they have fantastic stage 1s and stage 2s. And because of that, we kind of have to look at the things like Cranidos and Bastiodon that are in this set to fully evaluate this card. But even so, whilst this is a huge overhaul to the fossil mechanic, I don't think the fossils are going to be seeing much play anytime soon. Either anyway, really.
Yeah, I have to agree. But I also have to say that this is definitely great compared to like the laughing stock tier that fossils have been in. This is definitely a step in the right direction. We probably still need some like supporter help for the fossils because they're obviously way worse because you can't bridge it out a bunch of mysterious fossils, and you do simply lose to anything that has item lock. So there's still obvious drawbacks to playing fossils compared to regular basics, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. Next up we have Missing Clover. This is a pretty interesting card. It says you can play either one Missing Clover or 4 at the same time. If you only play one, look at the top card of your deck, then return it to the top of your deck. You're probably never going to play it for the first effect, and you're probably not going to play it because the second effect isn't that strong either. If you play 4 Missing Clovers at once, take a prize card. We've seen that things like Zoroark decks can draw enough cards to find 2 Puzzles of Time at once, but the difference between finding 2 cards and 4 cards is ridiculously different. Even with things like Mallow and other supporters that can get you specific cards, it still feels like so much work just to take a single prize. You may as well build your deck around any other attacker that can just take a prize a lot of the time. There's also the idea that you can recycle your Missing Clovers with the new Oranguru that we'll talk about later on in this video, which is possible. So you could go for a like lock style deck where in the process you're using Oranguru as an attacker to recover item cards. That's what Oranguru does. So you can eventually use 4 Missing Clovers 6 times in a row to win the game. But that feels just like way inferior to just going for a mill approach to win the game, because essentially all you're doing is stalling the game to use these Missing Clovers over and over again, when you could instead be stalling the whole game so that you can mill them the whole game, and it just feels better to go down that road. So definitely a gimmick card, and probably won't ever see play. It reminds me of Greedy Dice in a way as well. That's how I see this card.
Yeah, these cards with 2 effects are always really cool, and I think Puzzle of Time kind of spoiled us for the effects, because playing the 2 Puzzles of Time at once is just insane, and then playing 4 of these at once as equivalent to taking a prize card just feels really underpowered. Like, playing 2 Puzzles of Time will often lead to 1 or 2 prize cards because you're getting exactly what you want for the next couple of turns. So imagine doubling that for 1 prize. It's just kind of imbalanced in my mind. So unfortunately, I think Missing Clover is kind of not really going to see any play without some hugely useful combo that gets 4 items into your hand or whatever that we haven't seen yet. So yeah, unfortunately, Missing Clover is not great. Next up, we have Looker's Whistle. Search your deck for 2 Looker cards, reveal them, or 2 Looker, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Looker is a supporter we'll talk about in a little while. Essentially, you draw 3 from the bottom of your deck, so it's a Howl from the bottom of your deck. This is slightly better than Howl because there are synergies that put cards to the bottom of your deck. However, there are also cards that put synergies to the top of your deck. We're not seeing Howl being played ever. But being able to search for 2 of the specific supporter you want, it's kind of like a random receiver, but you know exactly what you're getting. And if your deck is built around Looker and drawing from the bottom, you're going to be playing Looker's Whistle to keep that engine running.
Yep, it just goes in if ever you have the need to play Looker, which will probably be in exactly like decks that combine it with Oranguru. Looker's Whistle is a reasonable card. Outside of that, it's similar to Random Receiver, but you would never really want the outcome of Random Receiver to be draw 3 cards, because that's a really low power supporter. It does guarantee you draw, whereas otherwise you could hit something like Guzma and be stuck, I guess. But it still feels a little bit below the line. It's pretty cool that you can keep grabbing lookers and essentially have 6 copies of the same supporter, or like you could have 8 copies of the same supporter if you wanted to go all out on whistles and lookers. And that could sort you for a few turns, but it's just the fact that Looker himself isn't strong enough to justify playing all these whistles, unless you are playing a deck that complements Looker, which we can talk about later on. Next up, we have a interesting tool card called the Skateboard. The retreat cost of the Pokemon this card is attached to is 1 colorless less. It's just a colorless, but yeah, it's 1 less. That Pokemon may also retreat while asleep or paralyzed. So we do know that there are some stalling decks out there right now. There's the Heatmore Raichu deck, and there's also the Hydreigon Raichu deck that relies on this Evo Shock ability from Raichu to do instant paralysis, and simply looping that every single turn. And also the Oranguru Looker Lock style deck will also incorporate the Raichu mechanic, I would imagine. So having a tool card that can let you retreat out of paralysis is absolutely ridiculous, to be honest. It completely shuts down that sort of archetype if you feel like you need to counter it. Being 1 colorless less compared to Floatstone is obviously a lot weaker, but there will be decks that have no higher than 1 retreat cost in their whole deck. And that's when a Skateboard just goes in instantly over Floatstone. It just so happens that there aren't many decks that have 1 or less retreat cost in every one of their Pokemon. So currently, probably weaker than Floatstone. It would be rare that you play a split of these unless you are really scared about Raichu and it starts becoming more popular than it is right now, because it's still in the sort of rogue or underplayed tier, I guess you could call it. And we don't really need to worry about Raichu too much in tournaments, other than like losing to it randomly 1 round from one of the brave people playing it. So it doesn't feel like we need to tech for him necessarily at the moment, but maybe that circumstance will change, or maybe you just happen to play a deck where everything is 1 or less retreat cost and you want to have a switching card. That's when he goes in over the Floatstone.
Yeah, for sure. I think for now, though, whilst Floatstone is still in format, it does outclass the Skateboard pretty much altogether, other than in these decks that do only run 1 retreat cost Pokemon. But in a lot of those decks, they don't mind paying the energy to retreat anyway. So overall, I don't think it's too impactful, other than for countering things like Raichu lock decks. But when we see Floatstone rotate, this could be our new easiest way of having, or our new sort of quote-unquote Floatstone for certain decks. So it's definitely a useful card to have if we don't see a Floatstone reprint. Next up, we have Mount Coronet, a 3-star card. Once during each player's turn, that player may put 2 metal energy from the discard pile into their hand. This is a fantastic stadium for metal decks. As you can see, it's very similar to energy retrieval. However, it is better because in general, it has a couple of extra uses. We've put over on the side, just there, we've got Brooklet Hill is much better than Nest Ball, because they do technically the same effect for fighting and water decks. But Brooklet Hill, 1, bounces a stadium, 2, also sort of stays in, if it stays in play, you get double the effect of a Nest Ball. And that's essentially what we're saying for Mount Coronet. If this stays in play, you get double an energy retrieval, which is a fisherman over 2 turns, which is really, really good. A lot of these metal Pokemon that we're going to talk about later on have high energy attack costs and like to discard their energy. So because of all of that, there's a lot of synergies with metal types anyway. And yeah, just having free energy retrieval per turn is just fantastic. We've also got a Dialga in here. We'll talk about Dialga a little bit later on. But as you may or may not know, his GX attack lets you take 2 turns. This essentially turns Mount Coronet into a free fisherman for the turn, as I was saying earlier, which is essentially getting 3 supporters in 2 turns, which is really, really strong. So yeah, just any energy recovery is great, and it has fantastic synergies with the metal type as well. So I think in general, this is one of the best stadiums we've seen in quite a while, to be fair.
Yep, this set does push the metal archetype, and Mount Coronet will be a constant feature within that deck, so fully justified as at least a 3-star card. Next up, we have Cyrus Prism Star. Now, Prisms are a new mechanic in the Pokemon trading card game. It states that you can't have more than 1 Prism Star card with the same name in your deck. So, unlike A-Specs, when you can only have 1 A-Spec period, you can have multiple Prism Stars in your deck, but you can only have 1 copy with the same name. So, for example, you can only play one Cyrus, and then you could play other Prism Stars as singletons as well in your deck. And then there's the second part of the rule. If a Prism Star card would go to the discard pile, put it in the Lost Zone instead. Now, the Lost Zone is a place, essentially it's a discard pile that you can never access, or at least in the current format, we have no way of accessing it. So, whereas normally you could use the supporter Cyrus and then use Pal Pad to recover it into your deck, or you could use something like Decidueye's GX attack to get it back into your hand. That's not possible. It's not in the discard pile. It's in a place called the Lost Zone, which I believe goes above your prize cards, for those of you wanting to know. And it simply means you can't access it again. And that would be if you have to Sycamore this card away, or if you've played it, no matter what, if it's meant to go to the discard pile, it will be put in the Lost Zone instead. So it essentially means that these cards are like a one use per game type thing. And they're all pretty interesting. Not just supporters as well, there are also Pokemon that we'll talk about later on. This Cyrus, however, is on the low power level, in our opinion at least. This card can only be played if your active Pokemon is a metal or water Pokemon. So you can see down below we've got a few different water and metal Pokemon that you could choose from, the most relevant ones in the format right now, other than maybe some of the newer metal ones as well that could be considered. And if you do meet that criteria, your opponent shuffles their benched Pokemon and all cards attached to them into the deck until they have 2 Pokemon remaining on their bench. So think of it like a parallel city, but they can only go down to 2 Pokemon instead of 3. So it's one more limitation than a parallel city would be. And instead of discarding, it's shuffled into their deck. There are benefits to shuffling rather than discarding. You can get a lot more jank into their deck if they're having to force evolution cards back in. But there can also be the drawback of the fact that people play Tapu Lele GX, and you're shuffling them back in for your opponent. Additionally, Parallel City stays on the board, so they can't replay things, whereas Cyrus simply makes them shuffle back in, and then if they draw the Pokemon that you just shuffled in, they can simply replay it down again. So there's a lot of issues with this, and most of all for me, the fact that Parallel City is a stadium card that does a very similar effect, and you don't spend your single supporter for turn, makes me think that you'd probably just play Parallel if you wanted to have this approach. And for most decks in the format right now, you're going to have like no more than 3 attackers set up. So being Cyrus on a turn isn't going to be too detrimental to you, because you'll probably just be able to keep fighting with your 1 active Pokemon and the 2 that are on your bench. So it's not disruptive enough in my opinion. You can't combine it with a Guzma like you can with Parallel City either. So it feels very expensive to me, very niche, and probably not all that strong.
Yeah, I feel that the effect is really, really cool, but overall it's just a bit fancy and not too practical. It's a really, really strong effect. Obviously, if there's a bit more use to it than it just being a supporter. But like you said, you can't combine it with some of these other detrimental supporters. And the other thing is, whilst we're saying there's a lot of options regarding metal and water types to have right now, in general, I think a lot of the times, a lot of the archetypes that these types provide want to be doing things like Guzma and stuff. They want to be aggressive, and this feels like kind of a passive style thing, style effect. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to see too much play. The one note on the Prism Star mechanic, though, I think this is one of the best mechanics they've had in quite a while. It's going to create some really, really interesting cards. I hope they carry it on, and it's not one of these sort of mechanics that we just see for one set and then it sort of disappears. But some of the Prism Star cards we're going to talk about later on are really, really cool. So I think this is one of the best mechanics we've had in quite a long time, and it definitely is going to lead to some interesting gameplay, I think. Next up, we have Gardenia, a supporter. Only 1 star, unfortunately, however. Heal 80 damage from one of your Pokemon with a grass energy attached to it. In general, healing 80 is a pretty big number. You're going to be tanking another hit, more than likely, with Gardenia. But unfortunately, it's very, very niche, and we do, in general, have better options. We've got a Leafeon down here. Leafeon's ability lets you heal 50 damage from a Pokemon with an energy attached to it, if it's in the active position. Obviously, combine that with Gardenia, that's a 130 heal from anything with a grass on it. That's a huge deal. But in general, I don't think this is, again, what you kind of want to be doing for your supporter for the turn. You want to be either getting a full heal or doing something else that's progressing the board, rather than just sort of getting what potentially may not be a full heal to your Pokemon. We have Pokemon Center Lady, which isn't seeing any play at all, pretty much because Acerola is almost always better in things like Stage 1 and basic decks. And stage 2s right now have so much HP. They're either playing max potion or they just have so much HP. It doesn't really matter. In general, it's going to take 2 hits to take them out anyway. So they don't need all that. They don't need as much healing. Things like max potion also help. So yeah, Gardenia just sort of doesn't do enough for the use of a supporter in a turn, I don't think.
Yeah, not quite powerful enough. And for me, having built some of these Leafeon decks, that feels like where Gardenia would naturally fit in when you already have the ability to heal as well. So essentially you're doing an Acerola, but you're not discarding the energy. That's sort of the idea of Gardenia. But the fact is, the Leafeon deck is probably building up a bunch of evolutions, and you have like no space in that deck. So you pretty much can't build around Gardenia because it will be too slow for you, and you'll be janky enough with enough evolutions in your deck already that it just won't. You won't have the space, and you won't really want to do it because you'll need to be drawing more for your deck so that you can draw into some of your basic Pokemon early on, or so that you can keep evolving once you've done your Grand Bloom GX. So although there's a synergy with Leafeon, the deck itself won't be very strong if you play Gardenia in it. So yeah, a little bit below the bar. Next up we have Mars. This is an actually card that I'm actually pretty excited about. When I first saw the card, I was really unimpressed, but then I started looking at some of the mill options that we do have in the format and how well placed they are, to be honest. We've seen the wishy-washy Hooper style archetype, and we've also seen the Sylveon, Quad Sylveon deck playing like a bunch of supporter cards, bunch of Lucamines, and just cycling lots of discard energy cards and lots of other disruption tools. And Mars can be, in many ways, a small disruption tool whilst also drawing you cards. And this is a great combination. We've seen this little combination before. You get to draw 2 cards and gain an extra effect. So in this case, it's one of those draw 2 supporters, like you can see Pokemon Breeder there. And you also gain the effect of Tormenting Spray, all in one card. Now, Tormenting Spray, is obviously quite terrible, but having the draw attached to the card means that Mars at least cycles herself. So she states, draw 2, then discard a random card from your opponent's hand. This can, at random times, cheese you into great positions, because you can get rid of switch cards or Guzmas if you're going for a stall approach. You can get rid of energy cards. You can get rid of their supporter, so they can't do much in the following turn. So if you're spamming Mars enough, you are getting some nice little discards here and there. It reminds me of something like Team Skullgrunt or Delinquent. Obviously much weaker on the power level in terms of the discard, but the fact that you're cycling is so strong, because it means you're drawing into more Crushing Hammers, Enhanced Hammers, Max Potions, more Lucamines, which is, for me, one of the biggest reasons why Mill is doing so well right now, is because Lucamine can recycle so many of these supporters that it becomes viable enough for you to play them. So, Mars is really good at helping you get this cycle going, and I feel like the discard is enough for you to get hand advantage and, advantage by starting to mill them. So I think in these sort of disruption decks, we can see a reduction in the amount of handiworks being played and an increase of Mars to really up the consistency of these wishy-washy wall-style decks, which is sad to say, but I think it's going to be something that will happen. And a quick note on Zoroark, why he's in here. There was one thing I was thinking about in a Zoroark deck as like a tech supporter, and I was thinking of playing Delinquent, because you're playing puzzles anyway. Maybe just playing like one copy could be worth it. Zoroark decks currently aren't playing stadiums of their own, and stadiums aren't hugely prevalent because there's so many field blowers around. But something like Mars could be a nice addition to the deck as like a one-of, because you draw more cards, and that's always good when you're playing it with trade. So we've seen so many decks cutting Sycamore altogether in Zoroark, or just playing like 1 or 2 copies maximum, because they never want to lose their hand. So Mars gives you an extra 2 on top of all your other trades, so you continue to get hand advantage throughout the game, and at the same time you have the option to just randomly cheese someone out of the game, because they've gone down to a 1-card hand size, which is just a Sycamore for the next turn. So it could even be just this one-of that makes people play around things, just like Delinquent has done in the past when Versus Seeker was around. So yeah, I think there's actually a lot of potential for Mars. It's a strong card in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just like a really interesting alternative way of playing these sort of locky stall decks. A lot of the time you're going for, yes, hand advantage, but less hand advantage, more card advantage with these decks, and you want to have more cards in your deck. But now we have Lucamine to be able to essentially have infinite cards. We want to be able to draw into all of the annoying stuff that we can do. So Mars is really good for that, whilst hopefully being able to cheese out some random stuff as well. So yeah, I think Mars definitely has the potential to see sort of a 1 or 2 of the way things like Kukui do in certain decks. Obviously, Kukui's plus 20 is often going to be, I think, better than discard a random card. But even so, we've seen, the point is we've seen that style of, or that amount of supporters going into decks just looking for 1 or 2 extra supporters. So yeah, I think Mars could see some play. Next up, we have Cynthia, our first 5-star card. Anyone that played in the Heart Gold Soul Silver era will indeed remember Professor Oak's new theory. And this is a reprint. Shuffle your hand in your deck, then draw 6 cards. This is such a fantastic card. Shuffle, draw 6 was staple back then. It was pretty much a 3 or 4 of in almost every deck, even when Sycamore was in format, or Juniper at the time it was. We still have Juniper, or Sycamore, I guess. And as we've just been saying, some lists, especially Zoroark lists, are cutting Sycamores. I think we could actually start seeing more lists cutting Sycamores and going for sort of a more recycle, shuffle your hand and draw X cards style thing. We've got N still, of course. So having Cynthia on top of N means that maybe people will start going for these shuffle draw decks, shuffle draw supporters instead of Sycamore. But yeah, just having Cynthia back is so good. It's a really, really strong. It's always going to be a good supporter, pretty much, unless you're at the very, very late stages of the game where you want to be drawing less cards, not as many as 6 cards. But you've got things like N for that anyway. It's just a really, really good card to have. The decks that really appreciate it are these stage 2 decks. Often, you want to be able to have as many physical supporters in your deck as possible to try and get into your stage 2s. Things like Candies and the stage 2. These are all sort of combo decks, so you want to just draw lots of cards. A lot of the time you'll have one of the pieces, so you won't want to Sycamore. Shuffling the pieces back in and trying to draw 2 of them is often going to be the right answer. And it's another, unfortunately for some, maybe fortunately for others, it's another useful tool in Greninja's toolbox to be able to carry on shuffle drawing and, just hopefully, or maybe not hopefully, building up Greninjas and just building a board that way. But yeah, Cynthia's such an amazing card. Pont was staple back then, and I think Cynthia, if not in the immediate future, as soon as rotation comes, will be almost a 4 in every single deck we see.
Yep, that's definitely going to be the case come rotation, but for now it can see players like the 9th or 10th supporter card. I think oftentimes you won't be cutting N below 3 cards, even in aggressive decks. Things like Volk can maybe start going down a strange line of playing like 2N and higher Cynthia count and Sycamore count just to have better N proofing against other decks. And as you said, Jack, just having the extra cards in general, like Greninja now being able to play 12 very strong early game supporter cards is such a scary thought for me. And like I personally hate frogs, and now they're getting good, I'm scared. And at the very least, Cynthia has synergy with Garchomp that we'll talk about later, so like she was a minimum 3-star card, but we know from our experience that these sorts of powerful draw cards are very, very strong. So definitely a 5 out of 5 card. There's pretty much no way around that. On to Volkner. This is a 1-star card in our opinion. It allows you to search your deck for an item card and a lightning energy, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. It reminds me of something like Steven. It's a little bit more speedy than Steven because you can get an item card that can affect the board that turn, whereas Steven can only help you out for following turns. But it is definitely weaker than Karina, which can get a fighting Pokemon rather than a lightning energy, because getting into your Pokemon is oftentimes more beneficial than getting energy, because energy is so easy to come by. You're probably playing lots of them. The only situation I can feel like getting a lightning energy specifically is really important is actually, once again, looking at these mill decks where people tech in 1 or 2 Xurkitree GX for its GX attack, Lightning GX. Sometimes you play 1 or 2 lightning energy total, and Volkner can search that out, and that could make Xurkitree a staple for these stalling, walling decks, if not already. So he could find a space as like a 1 of, just to act as like almost a second copy of a lightning energy. Just for Xurkitree, but beyond that, I don't feel like there's going to be much space for him.
Yeah, I think in Wishy Washy Walls, these stall decks that are running Circuitry right now, people will put it as a one-off because it also does grab an item, which means you can also get a hammer that turn, or you can also get a puzzle to complement the other puzzle in your hand or whatever. So as you're saying, it is a little bit speedier, as well as setting up that Lightning GX. But I think other than that, right now, Pokemon Search is much more premium, and Shuffle Draw a lot of the time is much more premium, or Discard Draw in general. So I think, unfortunately, searching for an item and a lightning energy, even in lightning energy based decks, probably isn't going to be too good. Finally, for the trainers, we have Looker. Mentioned him earlier on. Draw 3 cards from the bottom of your deck. There are indeed synergies, of course, with drawing from the bottom of your deck. We've got the new Oranguru and the Looker's Whistle that we kind of talked about earlier on. We'll talk about the Oranguru a little bit more later on. But of course, there are also sort of ways to manipulate the top of the deck. How isn't seeing any play. And right now, Gardevoir probably isn't anywhere near as powerful or as high up on the tier list as it once was. But even in Gardevoir decks that were sort of running a guaranteed one copy of a Gallade, they weren't playing How. So, it doesn't necessarily mean because there's synergies there is going to see play. I think the only way this will ever see play is this stall type deck where Oranguru is going to be netting back 3 annoying trainers, things like Crushing Hammers, things like puzzles and stuff. I think that's the only place that Looker's going to see play. But yeah, other than that, I think Draw 3 on a supporter is still too weak to actually make an impact in this format.
Yeah, Draw 3 definitely on the weaker side. Only works alongside Oranguru. Even with the Whistle, I think you can make the Oranguru deck good. It's just a question mark whether the Oranguru deck itself is good. And I'm leaning towards no, so Looker on the lower end of the spectrum right now. Next up, we have some of the first special energies. These are unit energies, similar to the old energies that we had back in... Oh, I can't even remember what set it is now. The
Dragon's Exalted.
Dragon's Exalted, thanks, Jack. Where they were 4 different types of energy. Now they're slightly weaker as just 3 different types. But you can see the one on the left provides grass, fire, or water when attached to one of your Pokemon. And the one on the right provides lightning, psychic, and metal when attached. So what's pretty cool about these is you can start combining this alongside 4 rainbow energies to give yourself lots of potential dual type things. So we can start seeing more and more stage 1s where you're playing 2 Pokemon with pretty much way less synergy than they should have, and it actually works out for you. For example, something like Golisopod Salazzle becomes much more realistic when you can have grass and fire and 4 rainbows on top. Like, that actually seems... Well, it does sound terrible, obviously, but everything becomes more reasonable when you can play these sorts of things on top of rainbows. And there's things like the Lunala with Solgaleo, where you can have Psychic Metal and rainbows on top of that, and so Lunala can move them all around, and Solgaleo can hit big damage. So it's all there, really. You just need to find the combinations for yourself, because there's probably lots, and those were 2 horrible examples of how to use those unit energies, so it's down to you to find some better ones. But yeah, there's potential. They're not really like obvious potential cards, but they'll go into these decks where you're playing sort of 2 energy attacking types alongside rainbows, just how we've seen things like Prism energies and other style effects like this in the past.
Yeah, for sure. These are definitely going to open up the doors, and even further and expanded, these are going to open up some really, really creative decks. I think you actually said one of the most obvious ones going into this is the Solgaleo Lunala one. Metal and Psychic, obviously those 2 cards have a lot of synergy between them anyway, but Metal and Psychic having the same energy type will be really, really cool. But yeah, we've put them as 3-star cards because it's obvious potential. We just need to wait and see what people do with them and what combos people find with them. But these are definitely going to see some play, and I think even more so in Expanded, it's going to open some doors. Next up, we have Super Boost Energy Prism Star. That is a mouthful. This card provides 1 colorless energy. While attached to a stage 2, it provides every type of energy at once, but only 1 at a time. If you have 3 or more stage 2 Pokemon in play, this provides every energy of type, but only 4 at a time. So essentially, it's 4 rainbow energies without having to do the damage to yourself if you have 3 stage 2s out. That's really, really good, because that means you can set up Pokemon in a single turn, which is just bonkers, provided you have 3 stage 2s. This is, without a doubt, the format that we've seen most recently where that's likely to happen. We're moving away from an EX format, and I think as the future goes on, we're moving even more further into a stage 2 format. which makes this card much better. The fact you can a couple of small things. The fact you can attach it anyway. You don't have to have three to attach it is really good. It still works as a rainbow, so if you've only got one Decidueye out, you can still Hollow Hunt. It's nice that they've thought about how to use it other than just this big wombo effect of having 4 rainbows on your board at once. But unfortunately, one thing to note is this is of course completely destroyed by an Enhanced Hammer, which Enhanced Hammers are starting to see a little bit more play. Special Energy is sort of premium right now. Zoroark decks are everywhere, which are running 4 DCE. Strong Energies are everywhere, things like this. So you are going to have to dodge and weave these Enhanced Hammers. But if you are able to do so, Enhanced Hammer is sort of only a 2 count in a lot of decks. Some decks play puzzles, but some decks don't. So if you are able to dodge and weave, you can set up a Stage 2 in one turn. And Stage 2s often have incredibly good attacks that are quite expensive, but can do a huge amount. So yeah, you can set up a Decidueye on a turn. This is 120 damage for Gardevoir's Infinite Force, which is bonkers. That can go from not having a Gardevoir setup to being able to Secret Spring, plus Super Boost Energy in a turn to get a one-shot out of nowhere. Again, it sets up a Metagross in a turn. It sets up a Garchomp in a turn just to do 200 damage on a non-EX, which is also really, really good. And then we've also got a Leafeon down here, simply because this seems to be one of the best evolution-based mechanics coming out of this set. I think a lot of Stage 2 decks may try out this Leafeon-style Grand Bloom GX attack to try and get multiple Stage 2s. So that's an easy way of hopefully building your board a little bit to try and find these Stage 2s a little bit easier to get out. I think in general, you obviously have to be aware of Enhanced Hammer and various other Energy Denial cards, but if you are able to sort of, even if this stays on the board for more than one turn, you get more than one attack with it, it's a really, really influential card. And I think most Stage 2 decks will run a single copy of this because it only can be a single copy. I think they will make the space of it just because it's such a huge tempo swing if you're able to meet the criteria to have 4 rainbows on at once.
Yeah, certainly a big swing. I mean, having that many Stage 2 Pokemon in play means you're probably going to win the game already. So I think for me, it's a little bit more niche. I think it goes in exactly the Leafeon style decks and probably Garchomp as well, because you have the Lucario support to actually get lots of Garchomps out, and you can search out the Super Boost as well via your Lucarios, which we'll talk about later on. For me, I'm not even certain if it will go straight into Gardevoir or Metagross, because think about Metagross. If you've got 3 GX out, then you can just do the Geotech system loop, and if you've got 3 Gardevoirs out, I mean, until you have 3 Gardevoirs out, it's worse than just a regular Fairy Energy, because you can't Secret Spring it. So I feel like there are drawbacks to this card. Obviously, the Enhanced Hammer's a drawback. But there are lots of our Stage 2s right now are synergistic with Basic Energy instead of Special Energy. So as the card pool increases, there could be more obvious cards that go alongside Super Boost. For now, I think it's still relatively niche, but it's certainly powerful in the decks that it can go in, because that is a big burst of energy out of nowhere. Right, so onto the Pokemon. We'll start off with the grass types. Here is Cherrim. It is a 1-star card in our opinion. Its ability is the thing of note here. Weather Guard states that each of your grass Pokemon has no weakness. Now, this is potentially pretty good for Leafeon Decidueye, which is hopefully an emerging archetype. It's one that we have on our radar as one of the new decks that I think could be very strong. The issue there is that Leafeon Decidueye is a very, very tight list, as you'll be seeing soon from us, and we feel so tight that it cannot fit a Cherrim. You may as well just go down the route of trying to attack with Tapu Leles against the fire stuff and just use Feather Arrows to increase your damage. And having the Cherrim on your board hurts your overall damage output anyway, so that's kind of annoying. The other potential place where this could fit in is like a straight Golisopod, if you're choosing to not play Zoroark just because there's too much fighting stuff out there, or there's too many things like Vikabulu or other big 1-hit KO decks that can just deal with 210 and sweep your board. Maybe you could go for Octillery as the backup and have Golisopod in there, and finally have an out to Fire decks. But again, that feels kind of weak in my opinion, so I don't feel like it's going to see much play. We previously had Araquanid in the format, and that's like a hard counter to Fire decks in many ways. That's never seen play, so in a similar vein, I feel Cherrim won't see much.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to see too much play at all, but if fire decks become the best decks in format and there is a grass deck that beats them if it doesn't have weakness, we have an answer, but I think in general it's a pretty weak one right now. Next up we have Leafeon GX. It's a card that we've talked about 3 or 4 times already. This is what the card does. It's obviously, first off, can evolve on turn 1 from the energy evolution EV, so that's always worth noting that essentially we can get this out turn 1 pretty consistently. The ability, Fresh Leaf Breath, once during a turn, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may heal 50 damage from one of your Pokemon with energy attached to it. Not a hugely impactful ability, but even so, it's going to be really, really useful in a format that really, really likes 2-shots, really likes Acerola and stuff. If you can manage to if you have 2 Leafeon GX out, and you have your own things like Acerola, Guzma and stuff, you can actually heal a lot of damage in a turn with this ability, which is really, really nice, because every time Leafeon is in the active position, it's treated as a new Pokemon, so you can heal multiple times. So it's a really, really nice ability to have in this format that doesn't always rely on 1-shots. There's a lot of 2-shots unless you're hitting for weakness. So yeah, it's a pretty like sort of influential ability in those kind of scenarios. It's got the Grass DCE Solar Beam attack for 110, pretty standard on these evolutions. And then Grand Bloom GX is the GX attack for a singular grass energy. So bear in mind you can do this on your first turn if you're going second, because all you need is to find a grass energy to evolve. For each basic Pokemon on your bench, search for a card in your deck that evolves from that Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. Then shuffle your deck. So essentially it turns stage 2s into quote-unquote stage 1s, and it turns stage 1s into basics because you can immediately evolve them on your first turn. That's absolutely huge for some of these stage 2 decks. Decidueye, I think, was mine and Joe's first immediate partner for this. This feels back when Decidueye had Forest. It was without a doubt always in tier 1, if not very high tier 2. And this feels the closest to where we've been with Decidueye in recent sort of months since we lost Forest. This is the easiest way, I think, to cheat these out. Lurantis is another one to help increase your damage output. One of the biggest problems with Lurantis is you have to have multiple for it to be quite influential, but with multiple Lurantis out, you can start hitting some really, really big numbers from turn 2, which is really nice. Solgaleo Lurantis is another archetype that saw a lot of play, or not a lot of play, but saw some niche play back when these 2 cards were out, and it was probably the most successful Solgaleo variant, other than with Metagross right now. But obviously that was a stage 1 and a stage 2 deck. Now you are jamming in another small stage 1 line to that deck, but you're also upping your own consistency and turning your Lurantis into basics and your Solgaleos into stage 1s essentially. So it could increase the overall consistency by just including another stage 1, which is really, really interesting. A final thought we've had is trying it out with Vikavolt. We've already got the grass energy in there in the Vikabulu deck. So it's going to mean you can get multiple Vikavolts out quite early, and you can even throw in maybe a Vikavolt GX to sort of have an even more versatile sort of pool of attacks. Vikavolt has 240 HP, which is so much more than the 180 that Bulu has, and whilst it is fighting weak, it still has a huge amount of sort of potential and tanking hits potential. So yeah, I think Leafeon is probably going to be one of the best sort of ways to build these evolution decks now, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see what sort of Pokemon we have to look back on and see whether we can cheese out with Grand Bloom GX now.
This is definitely the card that I'm really, really excited about. I want to say most excited about even. I think it's so flexible, such a great GX attack. I love Decidueye as well. I've liked playing it a lot, so trying to push that archetype is really cool, I think. Some of these other stage 2s, I know in Japan there has been a few Vikavolt Bulu decks that do play this, and they just get out their Octillery and their Charger Bugs all at once. That's pretty cool. So it protects you and gets you potentially multiple Vikavolt up, and then you're just in such a great position. I like it with Lurantis. You can just play straight Leafeon GX with enough Lurantis on the bench. You can add a Choice Band on top, and Solar Beam looks pretty appealing. You can even have things like Turtonator in the deck to do big shell traps that actually get 2-hit KOs, and then they have to attack into your Turtonator, or they have to pass their turn, or Guzma. And if they can't do that, they're in a lot of trouble. So that sounds really good. Even like Lurantis Galisopod, that was something that people experimented with when the promo was first released, the Lurantis, because it can improve Golisopod's output even more. And again, that seems pretty appealing, because Golisopod we know is such a strong attacker, and being able to improve that with Sunny Day output is just very appealing all over again. So we could see a Leafeon Golisopod list as well. So plenty of different options around here. You don't even have to be like a grass deck for the Leafeon. That's what's so cool. I mean, you can play things like rainbows and blends. It means you don't get the awesome ability from Eevee, but it's still potential there to get, multiple Evo Sodas all in one turn is like pretty nuts. So yeah, just overall really, really strong card in my opinion. Onto the fire types, not much support here I'm afraid. There is the stage 2 Infernape. It has Fired Up Fighter, put 6 counters on your opponent's burned Pokemon between turns. So this isn't stackable because it states the number 6 rather than saying X amount more. So it doesn't matter how many Infernape you have in play, burn will only do 6 between turns. I say only, that's quite a good amount of damage, especially between turns. Obviously your opponent can flip for burn, but not in the first case anymore because of the updated ruling. So it's a guaranteed 6 damage counters if you do burn the opponent. There are a few things that can burn in the format. The Salazzle with Hot Poison and the Salazzle that we'll talk about in the next slide both can burn. So getting a big ramp of damage seems pretty cool, but it's a lot of work just to get 6 more damage counters on your bench. I'd much rather have Decidueyes on my bench for increasing damage output than Infernape, in my opinion. So yeah, and his own attack, Burst Punch, does 50 and burn, so technically it's 110 damage minimum if you have your abilities online, so that's like okay, but yeah, it's still just below the bar, like way below the bar for a stage 2.
Yeah, right now, fire is a really, really difficult type to be because the current best fire deck, Volcanion, also beats all of the other fire decks in being a water type. So, fire type is you have to be a really, really good fire type card, I think, to outshine something like Volcanion. And unfortunately, Infernape, whilst being really, really cool, doesn't quite do that. Next up, we do indeed have the Salazzle. For 1 fire, 110 HP for 1 fire. We have Panic Poison. Your opponent's Pokemon is now burned, poisoned, and confused. So that's 30 damage in between turns, and confusion. All of those are really, really. That's a really, really good sort of group of things to have. I think confused is second best after. They're all kind of best in their different scenarios, but I think confused is really, really good right now. We've seen Espeon see a lot of play, and in the past, and confusion on Psyboom has always been something really, really difficult to deal with. And really, really annoying to deal with as well. So having another Pokemon to do that, or having a Pokemon do that, is going to be really cool. And then for Fighting Colorless, Assassin now does 60 plus 60 more if they are affected by a special condition. So that if they're still under the effects of Panic Poison, they're going to take 120 from Assassin Nail plus 30 from the status conditions. So with the choice band, that's 180. That's a lot of damage for 2 energy on a stage 1. But unfortunately, that means they have to still be burned and poisoned, and they have to have not moved out the active. And with things like Acerola and Guzma in the format, that's very, very unlikely to happen. Plus, you have to use your attack to set this up. Right now, we have the Hot Poison Salazzle in format that isn't seeing any play, and that's on an ability, which means you don't have to waste your attack for the turn doing it. So it's kind of underwhelming. There are obviously all of these different things that we can do to boost the amount of damage, things like, as we've just seen, the Infernape or Survivor. Maybe we will see some kind of proper status condition lockdown deck, but I don't think this is going to be anytime in the near future, just because it's kind of too much, I think, to set up. You don't have enough bench space to do a huge amount of damage, plus you need to find the stage 1s and the stage 2s and that kind of thing. This could be a nice little non-EX attacker in Salazzle GX decks. The gain right now, Salazzle GX isn't beating Volcanion, and therefore it isn't seeing play. I think as soon as Volcanion rotates, Salazzle is definitely a card I'm going to look at a lot more because it's got a huge power level to itself, and this could be a really, really nice non-EX attacker for that deck. But for now, it's a 1-star card just because it doesn't really have any impact on the format at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's got essentially Psybeam if you look at the burn plus poison damage. Its first attack is the same as Espeon. That's a lot of play. Espeon has a lot more HP though, and its other attacks are awesome, whereas this Salazzle doesn't have any of those things afterwards. So yeah, you'd have a strong early game in terms of frustrating the opponent, but there isn't really any transition into the GX, so it feels like there isn't much going on for this guy, unfortunately. Onto the water types, we start off with Alolan Sandslash. I wanted to make this a 2-star card so badly, but I had to restrain myself. It's a pretty interesting card in my book. It has the free attack cost that does 30 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, if this Pokemon is damaged, even if it's knocked out, put 6 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So I envisioned having another stall deck in the mix, just like the Wishy Washy Walls and the Sylveon Mill. I was thinking potentially you could go for an Alolan Sandslash style mill, where you have things like dumbbells and go up to 160 HP, and use Spike Armor every single turn, whilst having Slush Rush in the back to draw you cards every turn. Similar to how we saw Werelord use Shaman for a draw engine, and then you would just Sky Return for a bit of damage here and there. And similar to how we saw Slurpuff in the back while Seismitoad was Quaking Punching. Obviously, Quaking Punch way better than Spike Armor, but there's the option here for the deck to just play this 4-4 line of the Sandslashes. You play lots of Slush Rush, maybe just one of this one, and you're doing some amount of damage. And believe it or not, in stall decks, some amount of damage, if you can do it for free, it's actually really, really good, because you put pressure on the opponent to play cards, because otherwise they can simply draw pass until they hit cards. But if you're doing an amount of damage, you're actually forcing the opponent to make plays. So this is pretty cool, and you're forcing them to Guzma as well, because you have the Bursting Balloon effect on top of that. So I want to make an Alolan Sandslash deck work, just because we can play 0 energy in it, have lots of stall cards, and be poking the active every single turn. But overall, for me, not enough hit points is pretty much what this boils down to. Sandslash isn't going to have enough tank ability to make it work, and if the opponent is Guzmaring, they're Guzmaring away your draw engine at the same time, so it's like a double-edged sword. It's a win-win for them to use the Guzma and take a KO. So yeah, pretty awkward overall, but I really want to see this work, and definitely would be a fun deck to try out with friends.
Yeah, definitely give it a go, but I think overall, again, there's not too much impact on Standard. It's just not... It's too passive, especially with a format where Guzma is seeing high counts of play. A lot of the time, this is just 0 for 30, which obviously is great, but again, it's not doing what you want it to be doing. And the fact that you have so many Guzmas in your opponent's deck for them to play around this, it's just not going to do too much. Next up, we have Empoleon. This is a 2-star card. It's another really, really interesting Empoleon, actually. 160 HP water type. For Watercolorless, total command does 20 damage times the number of total bench Pokemon. So both yours and your opponent's. This is quite similar to the old Empoleon from Dark Explorers that had attack command that did 10 for every Pokemon in play. That saw some play. This can technically reach higher numbers because you reach 200 with a high opponent's bench size as well as your own bench size, which is a really, really nice number to be hitting on a non-EX. It is unfortunately 2 energy, but of course we do indeed have Aqua Patch and Counter Energy to be able to sort of think about when we're building this deck. Whirlpool for double water and colorless does 90 and discards an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. This also can be pretty annoying, but I think in general you're going to want to be using Total Command because it's going to be doing more damage and it's a little bit more of an efficient attack. We mustn't forget we have the Empoleon Break that I think a lot of people don't even realise is a card. Emperor's Command does 30 times the amount of Pokemon your opponent has in play. A lot of the time, unfortunately, they're going to try and limit their own bench, so Emperor's Command may not be doing too much either way, especially if you've built your own bench. If you've got 5 on bench, you're doing a base of 100 with Total Command anyway, so a lot of the time I think Emperor's Command isn't going to be doing too much, but there are certain situations where it will be doing that little bit extra and taking a knockout, and of course it gives you an extra 10 HP when you break Evolve as well. So yeah, filling your board with Zoroarks to be able to draw lots of cards per turn. It feels a lot like the old school Empoleon, except the trade ability or dive and draw ability is on a different Pokemon. But Zoroark sees a lot of play already. We know it's a good card. You can draw into your counter energies, you can draw into your Aqua Patches, you can draw into your Guzmas to start taking out things on the bench that they're setting up without sort of using your support for the turn. It's definitely, I think, has some potential. I think overall it's probably going to be a little bit too slow because it's a stage 2 and a stage 1. But if there's one stage 1 you want to be paired with right now, is Zoroark. So definitely going to take a look at this card and maybe even build it to see whether it can match up to some of these other stage 2 decks in the format, as it is a non-EX attacker as well.
Yeah, it feels like it won't have a chance other than the Zoroark decks. It's in a weird spot where you're probably good in Zoroark mirror matches because it limits your opponent's bench. Either they let you take 1-hit KOs, which pretty much wins you the matchup, or they have to limit their bench, which probably also gives you the edge in the matchup. And having 160 HP is actually really good against other Zoroark players, especially because you're not weak to grass, you're weak to lightning. So Empoleon's good in Zoroark mirror matches, but then again, so is Lycanroc, and like that just feels better against everything else. And the other sort of stage 2 that's been paired with Zoroark previously has been Decidueye, and Decidueye is definitely way more beneficial than the Empoleon in my opinion. So the spaces you'll have to commit to fit this thick line in and have basic water energies and probably have things like Aqua Patch in the deck feels like just way too many spaces that you're giving up from the other Zoroark decks in comparison. So overall, probably a little bit under the bar for me. But could be a fun one to try out, and limiting your opponent's bench is also really good in the format right now, so bear that in mind. Next up we have Abomasnow. This has a really interestingly named ability. Blessings of the Frost-Covered Trees allows you to attach a water energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon the turn that you evolve this Abomasnow. So it's similar to an Aqua Patch, but it can also be to the active, so it's a little bit more flexible. Unfortunately, it's just a one-time usage, so I feel like Aqua Patch is probably the better card, but you can also think about playing the combination of the two, and just think about how much energy acceleration water types can get right now. If you play a thick Abomasnow line and Aqua Patches, you can never really deplete your board of energy, which could be pretty cool. Currently, there isn't any means for making like a turbo water deck, an Aqua Box style deck, even though we do have things like the Manaphy. Lapras is unfortunately just not good enough right now with its weakness and the fact that it requires so much energy. It's just not in a good place. So one to keep in the back burner if we ever do get good water basic Pokemon to carry on with Aqua Patches. Maybe you play both if the Pokemon's hungry enough, but typically I feel like Aqua Patch would be the include, and Abomasnow sits in the binder, or not even at all.
Yeah, because it's a stage 1, it's kind of, why would you play this over Aqua Patch? Yes, you can go active, but a lot of the time there's so much to use from Racer Rollering format, as we've said, pretty much all video. There's no need to worry about having to attach the bench because you just move the active Pokemon anyway. So yeah, Abomasnow's slightly underpowered. Next up we have Glaceon GX, a 4-star card. Pretty annoying card. Freezing Eyes, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon. Each of your opponent's Pokemon EX and GX in play, in their hand, and in the discard pile, has no abilities. So this is ability lock for EXs and GXs whilst Glaceon is active. Which would be fine if this wasn't also an evolution. So on turn 1, if you find a water energy, you can indeed get into your Freezing Eyes turn 1, which can be really, really annoying, especially when you consider you can go, you can do this on the first turn of the game. So that's potentially pretty boring for sort of decks to have to deal with. And I think Ability Lock right now is really, really good. Things like Zoroark are seeing so much play. Freezing Eyes is just going to be super annoying for them to deal with. You can't Tapu Lele for Bridget anymore, or your supporters. You have to physically find the supporters. So in general, Ability Lock is really, really big. Whether this is going to be the end of the Tapu Lele era is yet to be seen. I don't think it is. I think Lele will still see high counts in a lot of decks, because there will be games that you don't that the Glaceon player doesn't set up, and there will be games where you're not playing against Glaceon. So it's not the end of the Tapu Lele era, I'm almost certain. But whenever you do see a Glaceon or an Eevee in your opponent's active position, you are going to have to start thinking about whether they're going to be getting Freezing Eyes out anytime soon, which is kind of awkward. As for the rest of the card, Watercolor's Frost Bullet is Night Spear, does 90 and 30 to one of their bench. Again, a pretty standard attack, but a pretty good attack. Nothing too shabby at all. And then the GX attack, Polar Spear GX, for the same cost, Water DCE, does 50 times the amount of damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. So You can actually set up things by Frost Bulleting them a couple of times and then Polar Spearing them for knockout later on in the game, which is a really nice sort of synergy between the two attacks. And yeah, I think in general we're going to see this style of deck, unfortunately, as a bit of an energy denial style deck. Similarly to sort of things like Toad in the past and that kind of thing. Crushing Hammers, Enhanced Hammers, all these kind of hammer cards that get rid of energy. So you can't Lele for your supporters to search out more energy. And then Judge also seems really, really strong with Glaceon GX, because provided you have Glaceon in the active, you're judging your opponent, and that's going to reduce their outs to supporters by technically 8, because 3 to 4 Tapu Lele and 3 to 4 Ultra Ball. That's potentially 8 outs that they don't have anymore to turn 1 supporters, and so that essentially pretty much cuts supporter counts in half, just under. So yeah, Judge could be a really, really annoying in combination with Glaceon GX. And ultimately, Freezing Eyes is what makes this card a 4-star card. We've got 2 or 3 different ideas of how we want to build Glaceon GX over here right now. We're going to be showing them all off over the next couple of weeks. But right now, in general, it seems like Freezing Eyes is going to be a pretty influential ability going into this format.
Yeah, it's a boring one, and unfortunately it is a powerful one. Frost Bullet doing 30 to the bench is such a big deal. It sets up the GX attack to deal with any big threat that your opponent can come up with, but also it puts your opponent even more on a clock for all of your evolution decks that you'll come up against. So many 60 HP Pokemon out there that you can start tackling in the early game, so it's just such a dangerous Pokemon to unfortunately be concerned about. There are a few saving graces. The fact that Cynthia has come out in the same set means that we can have high physical support accounts and reduce our reliance on Tapu Lele at the very least. As Jack said, it's not going to be taken out of any deck anytime soon. It'll still be a 2 count probably in most decks. But if Glaceon does start getting a little out of control, you can start increasing your physical support account. And let's not forget that Guzma could be a card that you can use to get out of Glaceon, just how you get around Trevenant at times. Do bear in mind that Quad Glaceon is probably the way that we're seeing this going to see the most play, but he could also be played to sort of set up things on your bench and have multiple other attackers available to you. I'm not sure if those will work, but I think right now the Quad Glaceon is the most powerful one and the most obvious one for people to start building. So yeah, it's one to be concerned about. There's another saving grace actually, it's the fact that it's weak to metal, and metal types are good. One Registeel can like solo the whole Glaceon deck, which is quite funny. So yeah, just bear those things in mind. But Glaceon will cheese out games, and that's always a good way to win games in Pokemon. Speaking of not letting the opponent play, let's look at the new Luxray evolution line. We have to tackle every single one of these evolution cards because they are all very important in their own way. The Shinx has the ability Head Start Evolution, and it says if you go second, this Pokemon can evolve during your first turn or the turn you play it. So that's really good. It means you can instantly evolve into your Luxio, which is obviously hugely important if you guys have already looked ahead and read the fact that this has the attack called Disconnect, which for a single colorless energy does 30, and your opponent can't play any items from their hand during their next turn. So it's Quaking Punch for 1 less energy, and it's colorless as well, which is absolutely insane. It is a little bit more awkward because it is a stage 1, so you need to have Shinx and Luxio in your hand. We need to get the combination of cards. We don't have Level Ball anymore. It's not that easy to find a Luxio. You may need to play some Timer Balls in your list even, who knows. But getting those Luxios into play early and just locking the opponent out of the game, such a solid approach. It's just really, really strong. You can see we've spread a few different things around the screen to see how we're going to try and build this. One of the things that I think is most powerful is just using Mew EX and fighting Fury Belt. Being a 160 HP Pokemon that can just do 40 a turn and stop the opponent playing items is just really strong. Even though it is via an ability, because you shut off items, you can stop Gardevoir putting a tool on, then you're only really worried about Greninja. But hopefully the item lock itself can force the Greninja player to never win the game and simply lose very, very early. So yeah, I think Mew, a very powerful combination alongside Luxio because it gives you that much more bulk. There's also the approach where you can play the new Luxray and use Shining Celebi to recall the Luxio's attack. And the Luxray is actually a really tanky Pokemon. It has Intimidating Fang. As long as this Pokemon is your active, any damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's attacks is reduced by 30. And that's what's very crucial here, is that it's applied before weakness and resistance. And this means that you're way, way, way less weak to the fighting stuff. Reducing 30 damage of Buzzwole's early attacks before applying weakness and resistance is hilarious, because their damage output is 0 now, and then they need to have Regirocks to start doing more damage, and Strong Energies, and obviously Choice Band doesn't work here, so you're actually very, very tanky against even Buzzwole, and for a Lightning deck, that's hilarious. It also has the attack Volt Bolt. You do have to break your Disconnect lock, of course, but discarding all Lightning Energy to do 150 snipe anywhere could be a great way to finish off the game, especially with Counter Energy available. You could just simply do it in a single attachment and do a big burst of damage. Think about that Tapu Lele that you stalled for a turn earlier on in the game, hit 30 to it, and then you can just Bolt to take the last 2 prizes out of nowhere. Seems like a pretty good win condition to me, and the Luxray has free retreat as well, so if you're having Luxio's damaged, you can move between, Luxray's damaged, you can move between them and use other Luxios and Luxrays to just keep the lock up. And Item Lock is just so inherently strong, it will win so many games, we all know that. The format isn't ridiculously focused on items right now. Obviously, rare candy decks are around. Ultra Ball, those are the 2 big ones. Tools aren't that important. Floatstone for retreating stuff obviously is. Choice Band wouldn't matter anyway because of us using the Luxio and Luxray. So there aren't a huge amount of things that you're locking out right now. I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think this will be a tier 1 deck. But there's still enough that you can just cheese some early prizes out and really put the opponent back a peg or 2. Maybe you can play it with Mew EX and then have follow-up attacks later on in the game. Maybe you just play like a 2-2 Luxio, Mew, and then have like a Mew box-style deck even. That could be something that emerges in the future. That's pretty cool. For increasing the damage output, because we don't do much, you could place a Viper Poison Barb, which is quite a funny way of doing things. If you have the tanky Luxio out there, you can get some poison damage and put the opponent's back. Obviously, it's way harder for people to switch when they can't access Floatstones, so Poison is actually much better. There's also the Sudowoodo option. I've already mentioned Counter Energy for the Luxray itself, but this could be a great way to improve your Zoroark matchup, which would otherwise be really difficult in my opinion, because they can still play the game, because they can still draw enough cards of trade that they can just out-hit you with Righteous Beating a lot of the time. So having Watch and Learn Sudowoodo could skew the matchup back in your favour, alongside Counter Energies, so that could be pretty cool. Or you can just play basic Fighting Energies, because Disconnect is colourless, don't forget, so that's another reason why this is so versatile and potentially very, very strong. I think there's going to be people trying the old traditional route as well, with just max potions and hammers, and that also just seems strong, because that's how Toad always saw success. So lots of chatter. Overall, I think it's a little bit less consistent than Toad was, but there's still enough versatility here and enough power behind Item Lock to be tested out. I think Mew's probably the best route, but also try out the Shining Celebi shenanigans. Maybe with Wally, so you can get into your Luxio, and then, again, in the same turn, you could even get into your Luxray and be a much more tanky Pokemon, because otherwise you just sit there with the 80 HP, and against loads of these Stage 1 decks, they'll just bop you, and 30 damage isn't enough. So definitely things to tackle for the Luxio, but Item Lock is Item Lock, so you can't write it off, really.
Yeah, the Item Lock part of this whole thing, it makes it an immediate sort of 3 or 4 star, and then we have to sort of roll it back, thinking about the rest of the card in general. But that's pretty much everything to say about Luxio. It's definitely going to be what I'm trying out, because, like we say, Item Lock is hugely important, and Luxray as a card is fantastic. Volt Bolt is a really, really strong attack. Like, it's exclusively better than so many attacks that we've seen in the past on even like basic and Stage 1 Pokemon. So it's a fantastic attack to have and a fantastic way to finish the game off. So yeah, I think Luxio is one of the most interesting Pokemon. Despite it being Item Lock, it's a really, really interesting line, how it all fits together. Next up, we have Pachirisu, another 3-star card. This is another really, really strong sort of energy base accelerator. Rub generator for a lightning energy. Lets you search for your deck for a lightning energy and attach it to every Pokemon on your bench that has the Nuzzle attack. Pachirisu also does have the Nuzzle attack, is worth noting. So your Pachirisus also boost the other Pachirisus in the deck, which is really, really nice. So yeah, think about Geomancy. That searches for 2 Fairy Energy, or 1 Fairy Energy for each of 2 benched Pokemon. Nuzzle can potentially be searching for 5 energy and attaching them all in a turn, which is bonkers. That's 6 energy attachments in 1 turn, which is just crazy. Especially as the Pachirisu has Nuzzle as well, it's even more likely. And I think the obvious partner here is, of course, Raichu GX. Powerful Spark being the same as Turbo, or the same strategy as Turbo Darkrai, having 20 damage base plus 20 more for each lightning energy on your side of the board. This can get into really, really big numbers really quickly, with choice band and things like that. Even just 1 or 2 turns of Rub Generator can mean you're going to start one-shotting things, which is really, really big. You're beefier than Darkrai. You've got the same weakness, which isn't great, but you also have access to Thunder, which is a big thing that Darkrai never really had access to. It was all about building this board with energy. Now with Thunder, we have a backup plan. So it's definitely sort of all in on this Powerful Spark Nuzzle setup style deck, but I think there's definitely legs behind it, to the point where we actually built it this weekend and tested it out, and it seems to be pretty good. So there's definitely a list coming soon. But yeah, I think we've seen Xerneas as a success, and this is essentially potentially 5 energy, a Geomancy for 5 energy. So you have to consider this card, especially when we already have a fantastic attacker for this deck in Raichu GX.
Yep, this is definitely my kind of card. For those of you who know us, Xerneas is close to my heart, and being able to do potentially 2 Geomancies in 1 turn seems like such an incredible concept. There are a few drawbacks to the Raichu, of course. You can't actually evolve your Pikachus if you're trying to Rub Generator for as much value as possible. And that means that sometimes you leave little 60 HP Pokemon on your bench that have like 2 or 3 energy on them. And that's really bad for you because Guzma is just so easy for the opponent from then on. So as soon as you start evolving into your Raichus, you have to be certain that you're ready to attack with them, because you will get less value from Rub Generator later on in the game. So I think you get way more burst potential than Xerneas does, which is great, but you're slightly less consistent. You are super YOLO on Bridget from what we found in our testing. You can max it out. I think that's fairly reasonable, to be honest, because getting as many Pikachus down and even Pachirisus is so important. And simply just being able to Rub Generator twice can set you up for the entire game. And when that happens, you can just steamroll people. I think it will be very strong against other evolution decks. It may be a little bit too weak against some of these other stage 1s that can be a bit more aggressive. One of the best parts of Xerneas is that it had 130 HP, and that kept out of range of things like Riotous Beating. Whereas Pachirisu, just the 70, lots of things can hit that number on turn 2 against you, and that's going to be a bit of a drawback to the card. So feels more YOLO than Xerneas, but definitely something to try out, and finally gives some claim to Raichu GX being a playable card. Onto the Psychic types, we have Drifblim first off. This was given a lot of hype for some reason when it was first revealed. It was one of the first revealed cards, I guess, which was important, and I think at the time, at least, Espeon EX was running around in a lot of decks. Now it's a lot less the case. Espeon's pretty much just in Decidueye builds. So if you are struggling with spread, we currently have Mr. Mime and we currently have Machoke. Mime does see play because it's just a single copy. Machoke doesn't because it's a stage 1 and you have to play a 1-1 line, which is already bad. Drifblim suffers from the same fate. It's a 1-1 line. At least, though, it's not an ability, it's an attack. So a lot of the spread decks at the time, one of the reasons why people weren't playing Mr. Mime was because Tapu Koko was being played in Garbodor decks. And it pretty much just doesn't matter if you play Mime or not, because they're just going to shut off the ability. Drifblim will always work, even if there are Garbodor lists around and Toxins in play. You can use his attack, Damage Carriage, that does for a double colorless. Move 4 counters from each of your Pokemon to your opponent's active. And this can pile up, especially if you're receiving a few Flying Flips or get some Feather Arrows dealt to you. You can deny a Devolve play and take a knockout at the same time if they are going for a spread approach. And that's pretty cool. Much more aggressive than the Machoke or the Mr. Mime would be, but it is still a 1-1 line and probably not going to be that useful. There's also the concept of damaging your own board first and then activating Damage Carriage, but again, that feels kind of niche to me. There aren't enough good Pokemon that can deal damage to your own board quickly enough to make Drifblim work. So currently a 1-star card.
Yeah, I don't think it's too impactful at all. The attack's really cool, but overall, if you're worried about things like Buzzwole and stuff, Mr. Mime's the play, and you have some decks just can't really play around Decidueye, so I don't think Drifblim's the answer. Next up, we have Giratina Prism, another of these Prism cards. 160 HP Psychic type, with the Chaotic Star ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to your bench during your turn, you may attach 2 Psychic Energy from your hand to this Pokemon. So it's the same ability as the old Pachirisu, the self-generation Pachirisu, that let you attach 2 Lightning Energy when you put it onto the bench. This is really, really good acceleration. Attaching 2 extra energy is really, really strong, especially for no cost, technically, other than playing the card down. It has the attack Crisis Dive as well for 160 and 4 Psychic, discarding 2 energy. This isn't a fantastic attack, but in a deck like Lunala Box, this may be your non-EX attacker or one of your non-EX attackers. And that's kind of where we see this card seeing play, if anywhere. Lunala Box letting you, or once you've put these 2 energy onto Giratina Prism, Lunala's Psychic Transfer letting you move them around to the attacker you want. That could be one way to try and get use out of this. Back when Pachirisu was in format, we had a Shaman that had kind of a similar ability to Psychic Transfer. It was slightly different. It let you move energy when it came down to play rather than whenever you wanted. But even so, that's the kind of strategy we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at accelerating and then moving our energy. Though that being said, we're weak to Dark, which is one big issue because Zoroark is absolutely everywhere right now. And 2, there's no super good Psychic types that can really abuse this, I don't think. Lunala is still a stage 2, and the Gain is weak to Dark. So, just in general, I don't think this is going to see too much play at all. But it's nice having this kind of energy acceleration in the back of our mind, just because this kind of acceleration has seen play in the past. And if we ever get something like the Celebration Wind Shaman that was paired with Pachirisu, this may indeed be one way of accelerating energy to get attacks quickly.
Yep, definitely a great way of getting more energy on the board. If there's an attacker that can discard energy from anywhere on your board, for example, like we had the Magnezone Prime way back when, that even played Pachirisu back in the day, just because you could discard from a useless target on your bench, essentially, and keep the energy on more important Pokemon, or if there are these Lunala-style Pokemon, even things like Ninja Boy or Energy Switch or Energy not Lotto, what's the other one? Energy, I can't remember what it is. It's the one that can move any type to the active, but yeah. Any of these sort of energy moving cards can make Giratina look way better. It just so happens that right now, Psychics aren't a great spot. The best Psychic attacker requires 1 Psychic energy, and it's Trash Launch, so no real home for the Prism right now. That's why he's only rated a 2-star, but his inherent power level is strong if he gets the right support. Similar story for the Lunala Prism Star. We will be looking at this card alongside the Solgaleo. They have very similar text, it's just they are grossly different in how powerful they are because of the card pool that they have surrounding them. Lunala's a Psychic type with 160 HP. It has the Full Moon Star attack for a single Psychic. For each of your opponent's Pokemon in play, attach a Psychic energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way that you like. This is, again, great energy acceleration for the Psychic stuff. It's just we don't have much good Psychic stuff. The Lunala deck probably is below the curve just because it's weak to Dark, so Zoroark will have a field day against you, and Zoroark's still going to be very good. Even with a Wobbuffet in the active, it's not going to change the fact that Zoroark will probably body this deck. And the other option is something like Drampa Garbodor. We've seen the Mew experimentally be played, the Shining Legends one, but essentially never really a staple outside of Philip Schultz playing it. And Lunala could be an upgrade for that deck at the very least to get some more energy back onto the board, set up a couple of Drampas and maybe some other basic Pokemon here and there, but overall I think it's not supported enough right now. Even though its attack itself is really strong. It's comparable to a Nitro Tank GX, but it's not a GX attack with the amount of burst recovery you can get. So it is very strong, don't get me wrong. It's just the fact that there's not much around it right now. And Psystorm does 20 times the amount of energy attached to all Pokemon. That, again, is a huge damaging attack. If you can get these 4 Psychic Energies onto your Lunala Prism Star, Feels like a great finisher for the Lunala GX deck, but as I keep having to point back to Zoroark, I don't see going anywhere, even with Glaceon. So, yeah, I think there's not going to be a window of opportunity for this Lunala just yet.
No, unfortunately not. The only thing to really note is the fact that this and the Solgaleo are both basics, so they're pretty splashable in their respective type decks, but in general, like Joe said, Solgaleo just has a better pool of cards, and Lunala doesn't really have anything that can abuse it right now. So yeah, I don't think it's going to see much play at all. Next up we have Dawnwing's Necrozma GX. This is a 3-star card. Has a very reminiscent ability to Keldio's Rush-In Invasion. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may switch it with your active Pokemon. So having Rush-In back is obviously great for certain decks that do like these Rush-In style attacks. Things like Golisopod, Volcanion, Buzzwole all appreciate this style of attack. They either prevent themselves from attacking or do more damage on becoming the active. So with a Float Stone, you can pretty much always have what you want active. And you can also get out of things like status conditions and stuff. However, we do have Guzma, Acerola, these kind of things anyway, so Invasion isn't quite as good as it maybe would have been if we didn't have those style cards in the format. But just having Rush-In Retreat, quote-unquote, in the format will always be good for decks that can slot it in, especially as it's on a basic, because right now the only other thing that has it is Zoroark, which is a stage 1. So whilst this is a 3-star card right now, there's obviously decks that it obviously goes in potentially if they can find the space, but there's nothing sort of inherently broken just because we now have Rush-In back. Onto the attacks, we have two. Both the attacks are triple psychic cost. Flash of Darkness does 120 and isn't affected by resistance. 120 for 3 psychic just isn't really what you want to be doing. It's not got sort of a broken. It's not efficient enough. It's doing the same amount as a 1 energy Golisopod. It's doing a lot less than things like Volcanic Heat, Knuckle Impact, as you can see we're comparing it to, mainly for the Rush-In ability, but you can see even on the very page that we've got, it's not doing enough for 3 Psychic Energy. So it's not really a great attacker. The GX attack, Eclipse Moon GX, for the same cost, does 180 damage, and this attack can only be used if you have more prizes remaining in your opponent, but you prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to this Pokemon, during your opponent's next turn. So it's essentially immunity for a turn if you're behind on prizes. The fact it does 180 as well means it's probably taking 2 prizes. So this can actually be sort of, you can set up a board in which you can win the next turn because your opponent can't do anything to Dawnwings anymore. But unfortunately, because you have to be behind on prizes and it costs 3 Psychic Energy, this probably only ever goes as an attacker in the Lunala deck. And as we've just said, Lunala doesn't seem to be going anywhere, mainly because even this included is weak to Dark as well. So I think, if anywhere, it's going to be played for its ability right now, while Psychic isn't a great type. But some of these decks, like Golisopod and Volk and Buzzwole, may start seeing if they can find space for one, just so they don't have to always sort of retreat into or find Guzmas and Acerolas. They can be doing other stuff and have Invasion to get out of these awkward attack costs or awkward downsides to their attacks.
Yeah, I mean, Keldeo saw a huge amount of play, but that was in an era where Hypnotoxic Laser was prevalent, and so were some other chunky Pokemon. So Rush-In was really, really important back then, and it had a good enough attack to be its own deck, really. Doesn't seem to be the case for Dawnwings, and also it's coupled with the fact that it has a really terrible Dark weakness. So for now, 3-star rating might be a bit generous. I think it can immediately go into Buzzwole because it really helps out Knuckle Impact, and you're not worried too much about a Dark weakness when you're a fighting deck. But there's not much else it can fit into immediately. Who knows though? Keep it around just because status could improve, or there could be a reduction in Zoroark where Dawnwings becomes a safe inclusion to give you some nice freedom of movement. Onto the fighting types. Here's another card that was grossly overestimated when it was first released. Rampardos is a very glamorous, very, very terrible card. Although we have praised the fact that the fossil mechanic has changed, fossils are still really bad. And this is a stage 2 as well, so it's not really a splashable card at all. to improve your Zoroark matchup because you're a fighting type. That's the only reason why people are talking about this guy. For a single fighting, it does 60, and if the opponent's active Pokemon is an evolution, it does 60 more. So 120 straight off the bat. Can KO Zoroarks, of course, but you'd expect most Stage 2s to be able to KO a 210 HP Pokemon, to be honest. You would hope so at least as well. And this isn't even serving the purpose as a Zoroark counter because it's weak to Grass, and Zoroark can be combined with Glycopod, and then you beat this deck all over again. So Rampardos not doing enough against the basic decks, even with the help of Strong Energy and Choice Band. Clean Hit not doing enough damage, and not doing enough against evolutions that aren't weak to fighting, in my opinion, because we don't have enough damage buffs to make it worthwhile, in my opinion. So, not strong enough, Clean Hit, and if you start looking at Wild Bomber, yes, you can compare it to Take Out Machamp, but it's a 3 energy attack cost. I would expect this to KO any Pokemon on the board, not just basics. Way too slow. Rampardos, definitely not a very strong card.
Yeah, it kind of... By comparing it to Take Out Machamp, you can see how grossly underpowered Wild Bomber is. And Take Out Machamp was a fantastically useful card. But yeah, in this format, Rampardos isn't going to be seeing too much play. Next up, we have Lucario. This is a really, really interesting card, actually, because this is one of these cards that sort of promotes inset synergy. So 110 HP fighting type with the ability Aura Premonition. Once during your turn, if Garchomp is in play, you may search your deck for a card and put it into your hand. It sort of restrictionless search is fantastic. It's so useful for just picking up the pieces you need. Things like N aren't a problem anymore. Things like not drawing into what you want it's just never a problem. Of course, you have the drawback of having to have Garchomps out, but there are some pretty interesting Garchomps out there that have things like Ascension and stuff. And once you have one Garchomp out, you can start getting multiple Garchomps out through your Lucarios to kind of reinforce your sort of setup. I've had this built for a couple of days now, and again, it's another deck like Raichu that really relies on getting that turn 1 bridge it into turn 2 Candy Garchomp. But if you get turn 2 Candy Garchomp and you can find one Lucario, you're kind of set up for the rest of the game just because you have 2 or 3 searches per turn and you're a full non-EX engine. So it's a really, really strong engine. Roserades, I believe, saw a little bit of play in certain niche situations, and that was just when you played it down. This is potentially every turn. So yeah, it's really, really strong. As an attacker, it's not even that bad as well. Missile Jab for 2 energy doing 70 damage and isn't affected by resistance. When you factor in things like Choice Band, Regirock, and Strong Energy, this is doing pretty reasonable numbers, and most importantly, one-shotting a Zoroark. So, you know, that's a huge, huge deal for a non-EX. It is 2 energy, but we do have counter energy as well, which is worth noting. And the Garchomps themselves, if you played a Cynthia this turn, can also one-shot Zoroark. So, you know, there's definitely merits to it being an attacker as well. Finally, we do indeed have the Fight Alone Lucario as well, which you can splash a single copy of if you're having issue with some of these fairy decks. We have Fight Alone plus Counter Energy. I don't think that's really going to see too much play. It seems fairies are going kind of down the drain as of this set, just because Metal becomes an insanely good type. But just having inbuilt synergies with other Lucarios in the format is really cool. So yes, it's a 3-star card simply because restrictionless search is really, really strong. And like I say, we've had this built over the weekend for the past couple of days, and it's actually been it's impressed both of us. I think on first look, we both kind of underrated Lucario and Garchomp, and now after playing it, we're a lot more impressed with how the deck actually functions.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very powerful ability in a promising archetype. The Garchomp looks like it may be good enough to be a solid tier 2 contender. So, yeah, Lucario's impressive. Its ability is great. And there's potential to just have lots of different random one-offs in your deck. And it actually makes sense, right? You can actually play things like Super Boost or Counter Energy, and you can dig out your specific DCEs, and you can dig out rare candies for more Garchomps later on in the game. As Jack said, as soon as your one Garchomp gets online, the whole deck starts running beautifully. It's just whether or not you can get to that stage, and that's why we don't have Lucario rated higher, because we feel we do still have the inherent weaknesses of a regular Stage 2 deck, and we're still ability focused, so we'll naturally not have good matchups against things like Greninja. So, yeah, still issues for the Lucario deck, the Lucario Garchomp deck, but it looks promising as like a medium lower tier archetype that can stick around, because one thing this format really is lacking is non-EX decks, and this is one of the most damaging non-EX decks that we have available to us, and that's definitely a good thing. On to my boy Persimmon. This guy can go straight into the Persimmon deck, if that's even a thing anymore. Oh, I tried so hard with this guy. But anyway, this ability is Power Scrum. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, each of your Persimmon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active evolved Pokemon. So we do have the team play Persimmon that does 30 for each Persimmon that you have on your bench, or 10 plus 30 I should say. And this could be one of those bench Persimmons that gives you even more damage. So at first I thought, yeah, maybe you can just play one team play Persimmon and lots of these to really improve your Power Scrum output, but it doesn't actually work, and it's way too YOLO to go down that route, because you'll need to hit Rescue Stretcher and a switch card every single turn. That's pretty bad, so it's more likely that this will be an instant one-of in the current Persimmon deck. It basically means that you don't need Choice Band to KO Zoroark GX, and it's probably good enough as a one-of to KO exactly Zoroark, and you won't be punished for it. And the Persimmon deck already can target Buzzwole as well, so technically it's in a good spot right now, but there's also a bunch of bad matchups for you, and a lot of the new decks aren't great for you either. So Persimmon is still like a low tier archetype, but this is an insta play in that low tier deck right now.
Yeah, there's not much more to say. It's going to improve your damage. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work with Mew. But yeah, in general, I don't think the deck has too many legs, but in the deck itself, Persimmon is definitely going to be an insta pick for building your list. Next up, we have another really interesting Weavile. Weavile seems to always get his interesting cards. 90 HP, Dark type, weak to fighting is of course pretty annoying. But that being said, it still tanks a hit without any other buffs to Buzzwole, so it's not too awful. Icy Wind for one colorless does 10, and your opponent's active is now asleep. Again, this attack would probably be better if it didn't do damage, just because Ace Roller wouldn't then be an out. But we're really looking at the Dark Bond attack here. For one Dark Energy, does 50 times the number of your opponent's Pokemon with abilities. And as we've been saying all video, really, there's a lot of abilities in format right now. Thinking about it, everyone has probably one Lele on the board for their Bridget, so that's 50 base. But then things like Zoroark are going to have 2 or 3 Zoroarks out, that's 200 damage for one Dark Energy. Volcanian's going to have 2 or 3 Volks out, plus a Lele, again 200 damage. The Leafeon deck builds up 4 Decidueyes, you're doing 250 damage for one Dark Energy. That's really, really good. That's really, really efficient damage. Unfortunately, as with every other Weavile, pretty much your opponent can play around this. So game 1 in your best of 3, they will lose because Dark Bond will do 250 damage to 3 of their Pokemon. But games 2 and 3, they'll get one Zoroark out and they'll win the game because Dark Bond's doing 50 damage, whereas Riotous Beating's doing 120 damage and they've only got one. They've got one Zoroark up and then 3 Zoroarks. So, it's a really, really cool attack, but after game 1 of playing it, your opponent is going to be able to play around it, and then by round 3, pretty much everyone's going to know you're playing Dark Bond Weavile, and they're just not going to bench their ability Pokemon. So it's a really, really cool Pokemon and a really, really cool attack, but it's just too easily played around, and that's why we've rated it a 1-star.
Yep, quite easy to play around this card, and the worst thing about it is that your opponent needs to have a full board sort of setup for you to be doing any damage. Otherwise, you're just sat there doing like 50, or just trying to send the opponent to sleep and sort of waiting for them to do whatever they want to do. And if you sit and wait long enough for your opponent to get their strategy off, their strategy will almost always beat the Weavile. So, yeah, pretty bad card. Next up, we have another Prism Star. This is very, very similar to the Giratina that we saw earlier on, but it's a Dark type. Good old Darkrai, still getting relevant and playable cards. This one has the ability Nightmare Star. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may attach 2 Darkness Energy from your hand to this Pokemon. So The same ability as the Giratina, as I just mentioned, but Dark is a more relevant type, especially in Expanded, where we have things like Dark Patch. That's very important, so this probably does go into the Darkrai archetypes. Even though Dark Pulse isn't always like staple anymore, a lot of the decks are just going down the heavy GX route, and then you play the old EX, the Night Spear one, for the free retreat. This can still go in that deck as a Ninja Boy target. It's much more reasonable when you play VS Seekers to play Ninja Boy. And this is the long-awaited buff to the Guzzlord 59 energy deck. You can play this and Ninja Boy into Guzzlords for some energy acceleration. Hooray. So now your Guzzlord, you're not YOLOing one Guzzlord, you're potentially YOLOing two Guzzlords to win you the game. And that could be pretty interesting. Maybe it's time to revisit the meme that is Guzzlord. But yeah, still probably really, really terrible. And it has the attack Abyssal Sleep. It does 120 for 4 dark energies. Your opponent's active is now asleep. If your opponent flips 2 coins, your opponent flips 2 coins instead of 1 between turns. If either of them are tails, that Pokemon's still asleep. So it's a little bit more powerful than regular sleep, and it can be annoying. It can break sort of locks of maybe item lock or something like that, which could be cool, but it's still a very expensive attack cost. So overall, not too fantastic, but probably does squeeze into some of these Darkrai archetypes, which is why we've given it the 2-star.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much always an insta-pick in for Darkrai decks. They may go back to more of a Dark Pulse engine now that they have an extra 2 immediate attachments per turn. And essentially, the worst place for your energy in Darkrai decks is your hand, so this also gets them out of your hand as well, which is really, really nice, because you don't want them either in the deck to Max Elixir or in the discard to Restoration or Dark Patch. So this is another way. This means that filling up or ending up with a handful of dark energy isn't sort of awful. But in Standard, I don't think that it's going to see any real play at all. Again, until we see something they can abuse, getting an extra couple of energy, much like with the Giratina, it's not going to do much at all. Next up for the metal types, we're beginning with Magnezone. This is a 4-star card. We have to look at both of or at least one of the Magnemites as well. It has the ability Hard Unit. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, prevent all damage done by your opponent this Pokemon done by your opponent's Pokemon's attacks. So this is essentially the same ability as one of the Squirtles that we had a little while ago, and conveniently Magnezone has Deluge for metal types. Magnetic Circuit lets you attach as many metal energy from your hand to your Pokemon as you like per turn. This is obviously always an incredibly strong ability to think about. What can we immediately do with these metal types? Well, it turns out the best metal types to do this with, or to pair with this, are in this set as well. But yeah, the fact that there's 2 very good cards in Duskmane Necrozma and Dialga GX coming out that can take use of Magnetic Circuit is really, really strong. The attack Zap Cannon can also mean that Magnezone is its own non-EX attacker in the deck as well, which is nice, doing 130 for 4 energy. That's not an unheard of attack cost to reach when you've got Deluge, or Magnetic Circuit in this case. So yeah, it's a fantastic ability to have. The Magnemite with Sparkling Induction is actually the one we've found to be better to play overall, just because you want the Alga in the active a lot of the time. But yeah, just in general, this is the backbone of this whole new metal archetype that seems to be at least tier 2, if not maybe even low tier 1. This is the deck that I think has had the most testing between me and Joe over the past week or so, and we've finally pretty much ironed out a list that we like. It took a couple of tries, but the deck seems really, really strong. It does kind of rely on getting Magnezone out turn 2, but if you do that, the inherent power level of the deck beyond then is just insane. It's worth noting that we also have the Magnezone from Breakthrough that has the same ability, but for lightning energy. So it's interesting that we have both of these Magnezones in format, and if there's ever any sort of weird situations where you could run both or another type attacker as well in your deck, we do have access to that. But yeah, just you'll see how powerful some of these metal Pokemon are in the next few slides, based on, and that's kind of what we're basing the rating of Magnezone on, just because it builds its own deck, as you'll see in the not too long future.
Yeah, Jack said it exactly. This card's potential depends on the cards around it. Just take a look at the Lightning Magnezone. This has been in format for a long time, and it's never seen too much competitive play. And that's because the best thing we've had available has been a Pikachu EX that has 130 HP. So this really needs good support in order to be good, because there are a lot of issues with Deluge. You need to draw a lot of cards. You need to keep getting into Metal Energies. You need to cycle them. However, we have seen Mount Coronet already. We have Cynthia, which is really good for stage 2s on top of things like Sycamore or instead of, so that you're not discarding Magnezone pieces or Rare Candy pieces, so hopefully you're shuffling into getting both. The free retreat on Magnemite is huge. I think that's the one that we will initially play, unless Buzzwole is too popular, and then you'll go back to the other one, which is nice to have this sort of option to play both. You can start teching in different counts of your Magnemites based on the metagame, and that feels really appealing to me. So having multiple good Magnemites is a really good thing to have for us, because Hard Unit is still a really important ability. Helps you out against Devolve approaches as well, if they're going to be like Tapu Kokos around and stuff, or even just Buzzwoles in the early turns, denying your Magnezone getting up in the first place. So yeah, fortunately we have a bunch of good basic metal types in the set, and that's why Magnezone's rated so high. This, however, is not one of the better metal types in the set. Bastiodon does still suffer from being a fossil type, or a fossil Pokemon, which is a bit of an issue. It does have a really nice ability, Earth Shield, prevent all damage done to your metal Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon that have any special energy attached to them. So it's pretty much giving all of your Pokemon the Flashing Head ability that Xurkitree GX has. Xurkitree is seeing play in the Storly Wally deck, because so many decks right now are playing Special Energy and only play Special Energy in some cases. So why is Bastiodon not quite as good as Xurkitree? Well, because Bastiodon would have to be like a 1-0-1 line or like a 1-1-1 line in a deck just to try and deny some Pokemon, and that's just not viable in the current standard format. So yeah, I think if you are playing a metal deck, you're probably already playing Magnezone or Metagross, which are both stage 2s, and that's really awkward for you. You don't want to start fitting in spaces for Bastiodon when you could just be more consistent overall. So that's the reason why people aren't going to make the spaces for the Bastiodon, because it just doesn't make sense. Even though the ability is very strong, it's too difficult to get him set up reliably, so there's no real need to play him. His attack as well doesn't really matter because it's not strong enough. So yeah, Bastiodon would only ever be played for its ability, but it's still not slow enough in the meta for us to take advantage of this guy.
Yeah, there's too many other options for stage 2 metal types, so unfortunately Bastiodon doesn't really benefit from this new Mysterious Fossil rule either. Next up we have Solgaleo the Prism, the last Prism style card we'll talk about, which is, as we said, essentially the exact same card, or mostly the same card as Lunala Prism. However, as you can see, this has a 4-star rating simply because it's a metal type instead of a psychic type. And as we've said with the past 4 Prism Star cards, it really depends on the rest of the cards around them and the support they have as to how good they are. And Metal right now is bonkers. For 1 Metal Energy, Rising Star does the same as Lunala for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play. Attach your Metal Energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. That's, as we said, essentially could be the same as a Nitro Tank, and in testing has been the same as a Nitro Tank in multiple occasions. Turn 1 Bridget right now is just so common, and it's really difficult for your opponent to, even in the late game, to have a small board, because they want to be using their layer base to search for Guzmas. They want to have this built up sort of board. So it's going to mean Rising Star is a really good way of reloading for that one final push at winning the game. 4 Metal Energy gives you access to Coronet Impact, which does 160, and this Pokemon can't attack during the next turn. However, that's not too much of an issue, because 160 is hopefully going to be taking 2 prizes with a Choice Band on something like a Lele or a Buzzwole or any of these kind of Pokemon. So yeah, this is a really nice non-EX attacker for these metal decks. But yeah, just having this as another option in metal decks is going to be it just is so insane. We've obviously talked about the Magnezone so far, and that's kind of your early game sort of building up of metal energy. But later on in the game, when maybe they've targeted down your Magnezone, this is going to be your reload to be able to take on the rest of the game. there's a lot of metal attackers that like to discard their own energy. Things like Duskmane Necrozma, things like Genesect does more damage if you discard energy, stuff like that. So being able to reload them on an EX and reload them really, really well, all in one turn, is super strong. And you can actually sort of use this in the early turns as well. If you build your deck such that you're able to discard some energy in the early turns, you can even use this as its own sort of energy acceleration in its own right if you can't maybe find your Magnezone pieces and stuff. So yeah, the fact that this is a non-EX, paired with the fantastic type it is, and it can also one-shot something potentially with a choice band, it's just all round a really, really strong card, especially for these metal decks that don't seem to need anything else to push them towards the top tier.
Yeah, indeed. Solgaleo, very, very powerful. I love the reload. It gives you an out to Greninja decks. If they start getting the Shadow Stitching up, you can still get some acceleration onto your Pokemon, start getting some final hits in to maybe finish off the game, which is nice. And that reload is incredible. It could even push a basic metal deck. I know that there are some players who are excited about it. I know a lot of the US players came to London Internats playing like a Registeel box style deck, and that kind of flopped. But Solgaleo is way better. That's so much energy acceleration that you can get. And the Duskmane Necrozma is also way better than previous options. So having lots of good basic metals around means that a turbo metal deck could be born out of this set. And I think it's actually quite likely to happen because Solgaleo is so, so good. And yeah, I'm excited for this card as well. Here is that card we were just discussing. Another 5-star card from us. Duskmane Necrozma GX. This is the definition of a beat stick. And it turns out doing lots of damage is still one of the best ways to win games in Pokemon. This guy is a 190 HP basic metal type, ticking a lot of boxes already. Being a metal type, great for Gardevoir. That's sort of going straight in the bin now. 190 HP as well, such a crucial number against a lot of different attackers out there. So already doing some great stuff. It has 3 attacks. The first for 3 colorless does just 60. That's with a choice band, 2-hit KOing some smaller things, or at least putting some things in range. It can also KO lower HP basic Pokemon as well. So it's forcing us, or it's giving us the option to not do a big blow-up attack every single turn, which is really nice, and it can actually help out if you're just trying to take some early prizes in the game without going all in. Because this guy otherwise is a huge, huge damaging attacker. 220 for 3 metal and a colorless is ridiculous. It's KOing a huge portion of the format already, but even with Choice Band, you can be reaching 250, which is dealing with pretty much everything else. So taking one-hit KOs on pretty much everything when you use this guy is absolutely incredible. Discarding free from yourself, not a huge deal when you have Magnezone, which is where he's probably going to be paired up with, so you can simply reload him instantly. Additionally, you could use Metagross GX to insta-reload him as well, and take 4 prizes with him oftentimes, because 190 is so tanky against other stuff. So yeah, just really, really powerful. Taking one-hit KOs is amazing, and Duskmane Necrozma is pretty much the best card we have in the format to be able to do that now, and it's pretty nutty. Its GX attack for 3 metals is a little bit cheaper than Meteor Tempest and could still be a good option for you. This base damage output is the 250, so maybe you're going for the Meteor Tempest and you miss your choice band. If you happen to be behind on prizes, you can still take that important KO, because this does 250. And again, this doesn't discard from itself, so you can keep your Duskmane around, and it means that your opponent can't gust up the Magnezone that turn, because they'll just get hit in the face once again with that still powered up Necrozma. So yeah, this guy is just so good at doing big numbers, and big numbers is so good right now when we have such amazing Stage 2 support for him. And as I was saying, with the Prism Solgaleo, there could even be a sort of lower stage build where we play things like the Registeel, maybe Silvally, maybe just Elixirs and the Prism Star Solgaleo to power up multiple Duskmanes, and then we just start swinging with this guy, because I think that could also just be hugely potential, because it's just simply so much damage, and taking one-hit KOs in this format is incredible. So many decks right now are reliant on Acerola looping and trying to grind out games and stuff, but this just says no. It's going to take prizes no matter what, so he's just an absolute beast.
Yeah, this attack, the fact that this Pokemon just takes so many prizes so quickly is what makes it a 5-star card. We saw Black Ballista do well in the past. This is essentially a reprint of Black Ballista with an insane GX attack. If your opponent starts going a little bit too wild, you can bring them back in, essentially take 2 prizes, and just sort of even the odds a little bit. There's just so much to do with this card. There's 4 options on the board, and there's always going to be more options, I think, provided we have acceleration for metals. So yeah, Dustmane Necrozma is just insane, and it is a fantastic attacker in this Magnezone deck. Another fantastic attacker is the Dialga GX. This is another really, really crazy GX attack. Well, GX Pokemon, but the GX attack is where I'm going to start, just because it's the most notable attack that I think we've had in TCG history since I've been playing. For 3 metals and 2 colorless, Timeless GX does 150 damage. When this turn is over, start your turn again. So this just takes 2 turns. This is bonkers for what this means. There's so many avenues that this sort of this can take. You can build this sort of combo with Guzma, Mount Coronet, Octillery, which is what you're going to want to be doing. Because the idea is to Timeless GX. With a choice band, you're doing 180. You can kill a Lele. You've Timeless GX, so you're starting your turn over. You then build up a Dustmane Necrozma through the use of things like Mount Coronet and stuff, which you're going to have in your deck anyway because you're running Metal Energies for Dialga. And then you take another 2 prizes on a GX, and you win. You take 2 prizes in the game, and then you set up a Dialga and you win the game essentially. Obviously, it's not as easy as that, and in testing, it hasn't been as straightforward as soon as you Timeless, you win. But there are definitely certain situations where if you Timeless, you can completely flip the board state and put your opponent on the clock rather than you being on the clock. It's really good for preventing your opponent from doing things like N and ending you out of game, or Guzma and stalling you out of game. It stops all of that stuff. It's good for regaining tempo, regaining the board control, stopping your opponent from sort of finally reaching their setup. Against what seemed like an auto loss, we played this deck against Greninja, and just Timeless GXing mid-game to take 2 knockouts is really, really good, because they're then left with sort of 1 stage 2, and they don't really have much damage output anymore. It's just such an insane GX attack. It's, I think, maybe not the best GX attack we've had, but one of the most influential GX attacks we've had in forever since the GX attack mechanic was introduced. As for the rest of the card, the first attack is also really, really good. For 1 metal, Clock Up lets you draw until you have 6 cards in hand, so essentially it's Bianca as your attack. So that's why we're going to want to be playing the Sparkling Induction Magnemites to get Dialga into the active as often as possible, to then start using Clock Up. Obviously, we've used Bridget to set up our board. Sometimes we can be left stranded with a hand that has no supporters. Clock Up is going to mean that you can refresh your hand or draw some cards and try and still have these supporters for the for continuing on the game after you've used your Bridgets and your Lele's in the early game. And then Metal Colorless, we've got the Shred attack back for AT, which is again another really, really strong attack to have. Anything that isn't affected by EXs or GXs goes through. Anything that prevents damage or resistance stuff like this goes through. This just goes through everything. So yeah, all 3 of the attacks on Dialga are insane. But the fact that Timeless GX is powered by Metal Energy just means that we're going to see games where board states that look pretty much over in one person's favor are going to be completely flipped just through this GX attack. This is just a bonkers card, which is why we've rated it as 4-star. We can't rate it as 5-star because it's still 5 energy, and you do need a choice band plus a Guzma to have this dream combo. But by no means the dream combo. Just because you don't hit the dream combo doesn't mean you don't win the game, because just taking 2 turns is insanity in this kind of game.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain this is the best attack in Pokemon, like, ever. I honestly think that taking 2 turns is so insane. If you're taking prizes, you get to draw 2 cards, and then you get to draw for your turn, and then you get to play everything with your opponent being able to do nothing. how often does your opponent only have 2 Pokemon set up ready to attack with? And if you can KO one of them with Timeless and then KO the other one the following turn, with the opponent not having any reaction, any damage on the Dialga at all, it's just so insane. It's absolutely incredible. The clock up attack as well is actually like ridiculously important. That's one of the reasons why Dialga is probably going to be like a 2 count in the Magnezone deck, because he's so important for actually getting you into Magnezone. And once you do that, you just win a lot of the time, because the Timeless GX attack is so powerful. There's been times when it's fallen flat, when you need to take a risk with Timeless GX, but even when it like doesn't do good and like doesn't insta win you the game, it still just does so much for you. It gives you a recycle of your hand, gives you a 2-hit KO for free on any Pokemon. Like, that's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario of this attack is that you get to get a 350 damage and use another supporter for turn, and use Mount Coronet again, and use Abyssal Hand all in the same turn. That's like the bad case scenario. And then so much can go right for this card that it's just absolutely absurd. Shred helps out. There's not too much you have to worry about, but there is things like the Hooper going around, I guess. But yeah, Timeless is honestly the most insane attack I've ever read. The only thing keeping it from being a 5-star is that its attack cost is so high that it can only be played in the Magnezone deck or in the Metagross deck. But I think it's a powerful enough card to play it in both, so we're going to, and it's going to be bonkers in those decks. So be aware that this is insane, and you're just going to be bored if you're playing against this card, because you just have to sit there nodding while the opponent plays the game for like 10 minutes in front of you, while your board just goes to nothing. So yeah, this Dialga is absolutely absurd, and yeah, it's going to be boring to play against, because when people get the combo off, you literally just can't play against them. Super uninteractive, super not fun. But if you're the one doing the Dialga, you feel like an absolute boss. There you go. On to this Garchomp that we talked about earlier that has the synergy with the Lucario. This is a really cool card. The Garchomp itself has 150 HP, has free retreat as well, just like the other Garchomp, so there's some nice synergy there. You can cut some corners in your deck list for spaces, and it has 2 pretty powerful attacks. The first is just for a DC 50 anywhere, not too great. I mean, we've seen it on things like Stage 1s, and it's been reasonable, but the real cream of the crop attack here is Champion's Blade, that for a fighting DC does 100 base, and if you played Cynthia from your hand during this turn, you can deal 100 more damage. 200 plus Choice Band is dealing with, once again, lots of things in the format, so this is definitely a golden number that you can strive for. We do have the Super Boost Energy, we have Energy Acceleration from the Turbo Assault Garchomp, and of course we have the Lucario that can dig out things like double colorless from your deck and keep you moving, and hopefully get you Champion's Blade going as often as you like. Obviously there are drawbacks to using Cynthia every turn, and that's because you can't use Guzma and N in combination, and the Garchomp deck can't really go for a Guzma play and take a knockout unless you've already put some prior damage on it, which is a big downside to Garchomp Lucario as an archetype. But anything that's in the active, you can go for a big blow up in front of you. So very cool, lots of damage. There are some nice lower stages that can also help out the deck. The Gibble can have free retreat if you attach a fighting energy to it, and the Gabite can evolve into a Garchomp, which is also important just because Lucario can then become online. There's also an Ascension Gibble, but you don't really want to do that because you'll just leave an 80 HP Pokemon in the active and it'll just get knocked out. So stick with a free retreat Gibble, that's way safer. It then means that you can play Alolan Vulpix as well, and you can start using beacons more consistently and get you into things like the Garchomp pieces and the Lucarios, which is obviously very important. There are obviously drawbacks to playing the Cynthia, we've just mentioned them. You can try and cover these gaps by having things like Counter Catcher in the list, Red Card even to disrupt your opponent's hand size in combination with Cynthia at the same time. You can play just like 1 or 2 counts of these because we have the Lucario that can search the deck for anything, which is nice. We have Pal Pad, so we can cycle Cynthia more than 4 times, or we can use Cynthia more than 4 times, which is thankful because Champion's Blade is so important. But at the same time, you have to remember the fact that you can use the other Garchomp attacking, or you can use the Lucario attacking on certain turns, on the turns that you don't want to use Cynthia. So it's not quite as straightforward as I have to Cynthia every single turn, but for those big blow-up attacks, you can go for it. So I do think this is a potentially very, very strong non-EX archetype, and we really are in need of one of those in the format right now.
Yeah, I think this is inherently the best one or one of the best ones we've got, and it's really nice that it's got this inbuilt synergy as well. I think it will only remain as a 3-star for now, just because there are some inherent issues with if you don't get the stage 2 out, you never really get running. It's similar to some of these things like Magnezone, like Vikabulu. You do really rely on getting the stage 2 out. The difference is though, if you do get the stage 2 out, you pretty much have such a good setup. You can do whatever you want. So yeah, we've got lots of options for things like red card and counter capture with this. So I think it's definitely a 3-star card, and we'll at least see some experimentation. Next up, for as good as Dialga GX is, Palkia GX just gets the rod again, and I don't know why Pokemon hate Palkia, because Dialga's always seemed to be better, but hey. 180 HP, same as the Dialga. 1 Water Energy, Spatial Control, move as many energy as you like from your bench Pokemon to this Pokemon. This sets up your big GX attack in one turn, which obviously we don't have our own Water-type Deluge right now. So this can be a way to cheat your way into Zero Vanish GX later on in the game. For now, though, Hydro Pressure for 3 colorless energy does 60 damage, plus 20 more for each water attached to this Pokemon. That's 120 if you've used just waters to fuel the attack, 150 for 3 if you've got a Choice Band on. That's okay damage, but again, we don't have any acceleration for waters other than Aqua Patch, and you can't Aqua Patch to this anyway. So, you know, it's not really, there's not really as much synergy in here. And then the GX attack is another pretty insane attack effect for 3 waters and 2 colorless. Zero Vanish GX does 150 damage, and your opponent shuffles all energy attached to their Pokemon into their deck. So for things like Xerneas and Darkrai, that's insane. That wins you the game. But actually, probably not, because Palkia's weak to Xerneas as well, so it doesn't even beat Xerneas. That's sad. But yeah, against a lot of these decks right now, we're seeing energy counts of 7 or 8. We're seeing 4 Grass, 4 DCE. We're seeing those kinds of energy. We're seeing a lot of attacks that only attack for 1 energy. Things like Buzzwole just attack for 1 energy a lot of the time until the late game. So, you know, Zero Vanish actually is probably only shuffling 2 to 3 energy a lot of the time into the deck. If you compare that with a knockout, that's obviously great because it means that your opponent can't send something up and attack immediately. But it's just nowhere near as strong as taking another turn. So yeah, for as good as Dialga is, Palkia unfortunately isn't as favored once again, and Zero Vanish GX just isn't as game breaking as Timeless GX.
Yeah, I mean the effect of the attack is never going to be as good as Dialga's, because Dialga's is the best I've ever seen. But I mean, Palkia's is just so awkward. Like, it's hard enough for Dialga, and that has Metagross and Magnezone. Palkia doesn't have either of those things. It has like Abomasnow. So like the combination is just like so sad for Palkia. Maybe you can play it in Archiestoise as like a one-of if you're worried about Turbo Dark in Expanded. That's the only real place I can ever see this card seeing play. Otherwise, it's just Troll GX. You'll see that little dragon color when you're pulling your booster pack, and you pray for Dialga, and it always turns out to be Palkia. Sad times. For colorless Pokemon, we have Oranguru. He is a 3-star card in our eyes. We have mentioned already the sort of combination with Looker, and this is what the Oranguru himself does. For a single colorless, you can put 3 cards from your discard pile onto the bottom of your deck in any order for a single colorless energy. So that is very, very strong. Being able to recover 3 pieces of anything is just really, really nice for you. Being able to do this can get back things like double colorless energies. It can get back important item cards. It can get back supporter cards. It can do a lot for you. For making a lock in combination with Looker, this can be really nice. It can get you into an infinite chain of using the Evo Shock Raichu, and it could be the new face of the sort of Heatmore deck or the Hydreigon deck, whichever one you prefer currently. This could be a new way around it, and that's pretty cool. You'll also inherently be playing Lightning energies, or you can play energies in general that are basic, so you can play Lightning for Xurkitree GX much more naturally, and that's also very good for a sort of stalling deck. Oranguru getting this much recovery in combination to things like Sableye and Bunnelby is very, very good. Junk Hunt obviously is still better than this because it goes instantly to the hand and you don't have to spend Looker to access those cards. But in terms of getting back these important resources against other mill approaches, just for any deck in general, Oranguru could start becoming a one-of, just like Bunnelby was when things like Toad Tina were becoming popular and such. So being able to recover important cards is really, really good for you. And I think he is good enough in some decks to give you like an auto win against other stall to be played. But he could also be seen in the sort of infinite lock deck. I think that deck probably isn't going to be that strong just because Decidueye Leafeon seems to be an archetype and that'll just absolutely own the deck. And there's also a few other cards that can get around it naturally as well. Being able to take 2 turns, for example, means that you get away from paralysis and you just beat their lock. And yeah, there's lots of ways you can get around it. So the Oranguru Looker deck feels very consistent compared to all the other builds we have out there right now. So it's promising in that regard. But it feels like the current decks in the format have the answers. Things like Greninja as well will have an instant answer to it. So there's too many decks that you have to dodge for that sort of stall approach. And that's why I don't think Oranguru will see a huge amount of play. But he can still be that one-of option for you just to recover important resources.
Yeah, I think as a deck, in any deck that maybe doesn't have a natural fit for a non-EX, this could be a really, really nice resource management. The attack is called resource management, so you know that's kind of what the card's for. And I think this will see some play, or at least some testing, just as we don't have things like VS Seeker anymore. This could potentially be 3 supporters that are 3 more outs to late game ends. Finally, the Rotom package we've saved till the end just because we didn't want to talk about each of them individually. There's no real point. They each have the ability Rotomotor. If there are 9 or more Pokemon tool cards in your discard pile, ignore all energy necessary to use this Pokemon's attacks. So essentially, you have to think of the ideal scenario, and that is that there's 9 tools in the discard. So we're playing something like Gourgeist. These seem like potentially Pokemon that we could throw into the Gourgeist deck to cover some weaknesses, or cover some other types at least. So looking at each of the attacks individually, we've got Wash Arrow doing a 50 snipe, Curly Spin doing 20 to each of your opponent's each of your opponent's Pokemon. Sorry, Special Cut for 60, discarding a special energy attached to the active. Plasma Slash for 120 and being unable to attack next turn. Frost Crash for 10 plus 20 for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. And Heat Blast for a flat 80. All of these attacks are pretty underwhelming, even when they're free because of how much you have to do for them to become free. I think Frost Crash is the best attack we have. But again, we're kind of in a format where some decks are playing 6 or 7 energy and it's just DCEs, so you're doing 50 for free, which just isn't great. You're also weak to metal, so that's also a really, really bad weakness to have right now. So yeah, just in general, the ability is really cute. And in Gourgeist, there may be some experimentation, I guess, for trying to hit multiple types for weakness. But I think overall, this is a cute mechanic, but not a good mechanic.
Yeah, a nice little theme within the set is pretty cool. I think, as Jack said, maybe the fire one will be a one-of in the Gourgeist deck, because with Choice Band, you can KO things like the Duskmane, and you can KO the Leafeon and Golysopods. That seems pretty good, especially because the Gourgeist itself is a Psychic type, and many of the important Metal types have resistance, so it's quite difficult for Gourgeist to get the one-hit KOs. So maybe the Fire Rotom becomes exactly a 1 count in that deck, and maybe the Lightning one, the regular one, becomes an exact one-of in that deck as well, just because it can do a flat 120 and you don't discard tools. So against like decks where you don't need to reach that far, you can maintain and keep some tools around for later big one-hit KOs, because you don't want to run out of fuel as the Gourgeist deck. That's one of the issues of it, although there are still many other issues. So yeah, those 2 Rotoms and the Frost Crash one for Volk as well, if you feel that's a bad matchup for Pumpkaboo, which it probably isn't, or Gourgeist I should say. But yeah, the Fire one and the Lightning one could be one-ofs. The other ones don't seem to have too much potential. And as their own deck, playing like a 0 energy deck, I don't think it'll work, because You lose to ability lock, and you probably don't even beat a lot of things that you're not hitting for weakness, just because the inherent damage that you're doing, like 120 being like your main damage output, isn't good enough in an Acerola format. So yeah, the Rotoms seem overall fairly underwhelming, but something to keep an eye on for hitting important weaknesses. So that is going to be it. Check out the overall breakdown of our ratings. We gave 2 5-stars to Cynthia and the Dusk main Necrozma, with Leafeon and Dialga being some other really important standouts as well. Not quite 5 stars because they're not really universal, and they're a little bit more niche. And then there's plenty of other good cards as well. We talked about, lots of cards overall. One of the sets where we've talked about so many things, just because there's so many cards of note, is already a good sign for the set. So I think overall, definitely a good set to get packs for.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is one of the best sets we've had in a while. I'm certainly going to hopefully be getting some boxes. But yeah, other than that, I think we've pretty much covered everything regarding this set on the whole. There's some final shiny cards for you to look at as we do our little outro. There's some really, really cool shiny cards here, sort of full arts and stuff. So there's always the bling to try and get whilst you're hunting for your Dialgas and Solgaleo Prism Stars and things like that. So yeah, other than that, make sure you stay tuned to all of our OmniPoke related content. We're going to hopefully start pumping out some deck lists over the next few days and weeks, some of the newer ones, and then we'll have a little look at what the set does in general for some of these tournaments coming up, and we'll also be taking a look at the last sort of stages of the current format we're in, just before Leipzig and a couple of the American regionals, and then Australian internats as well. So yeah, make sure you stay tuned to lots of fun OmniPoke content over the next few weeks. We're still streaming at the moment twice a week guaranteed, until we get a sub button, and maybe we'll be able to stick to that once we do. So make sure you go and check us out on Twitch as well. And yeah, other than that, unless there's anything else you want to say, Joe?
No, I'm good, man. That sounds like it. Yeah, we'll leave it there, guys. Cheers. Dialga's OP.